The story begins in a world where without a prince to help break the spell, the princess will sleep forever. The beauty will forever remain young and pure, like in a dream, and her brother Yugue will do everything to save her. She will stay away from the terrible events in the world, and without knowing it, will fall in love with someone. All this did not happen by chance, because one witch was involved in this. Everything happened exactly as the 12th witch, who looked like a charming blonde, wished. The nurse was alone with the patient, but suddenly the patient's brother entered the room with flowers, who had come to visit her. The young man who entered was extremely embarrassed and asked Sister Jinji if she really examined patients like that. The girl smiled sweetly at the young man and said that he was not thinking about that at all. She immediately got up from her hospital bed to talk to this guy and explain everything to him. Jinji said that she had just finished examining her sister, Xiao Meng, and it turned out that all her indicators were normal. But at some point the nurse said in a not very confident voice that there was one thing. The young man asked her if the patient had regained consciousness, and Jean was silent for the first few seconds. In the end, she said that this was a consequence of a disappearing soul syndrome, more of a peculiar process than a disease. 5 years ago, it was discovered that 1 in 5 people lost consciousness during the night, and this looked very strange. People one after another closed their eyes and fell to the ground unconscious. Such a sight was very frightening. Jean said that even modern technology cannot help cure this pathology. They can only try to preserve the body. The young man sat on his knees by Xiao Meng's bed, upset and expressionless. The young man said that waiting was no problem, and a monitor at that moment displayed Xiao Meng's general condition. The hero's gaze was still anxious. Something indescribable was happening in his soul, and he was holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. He emphasized that as fewer and fewer people believe in revival, hope begins to fade. Jean said that it was not easy for him either, and all the nurses could see it because they even remembered his clothes, but the guy smiled after her words. The nurse put aside the bouquet, given to her by the young man, so that it would not get in the way, but the hero only cast an impassive glance at her. At some point, he said he was going to leave and reach for the bouquet of flowers she had placed on the table. The young man's actions left Jean slightly stunned because she did not understand what was happening. As he was leaving, the young man said that he did not want the flowers to wither, so he would take them with him. He said that if Xiao Meng one day opened his eyes and saw the wilted flowers, he would definitely be upset. A few seconds later, a man in black boots stepped over the threshold of the room, preparing to leave the building. After leaving the room, the young man froze for a moment, deep in thought. He stood firmly on his feet. His legs remained motionless for a while. He was wearing black sneakers. The young man put his hand into the bouquet, as if intending to get something out of it, and his face remained serious. Finally, from the very bottom of the bouquet of flowers, the guy pulled out a tiny video camera. He immediately used it to view all the video footage she had managed to record. In one of the video clips, Nurse Jean entered the room where Xiao Meng was lying. The nurse slowly crept up to the endlessly sleeping Xiao, and her intentions were unknown. After a few seconds, she approached the sleeping patient and leaned slightly towards her. Jean reached out to Xiao Meng's chest, intending to do something with it, and lightly pulled the girl's jacket over her. Suddenly, the camera captured a strange bright yellow color emanating from Xiao Meng's chest. Finally, the video ended and the young man breathed a sigh of relief. He started pressing buttons, trying to understand what was going on there, but these thoughts did not bring him peace. Yugue looked at the monitor screen, continuing to try to figure out Jean Ji's strange actions. After a moment, he started typing something on the keyboard to find at least some clue in this video. For several minutes, Yugue watched fragments of the video, trying to understand the essence of a nurse's actions. 29-year-old Jean Ji is the head nurse of the 5th hospital in Xiaoqing District. Nobody knows what she did before taking office, and it is a real mystery. Jing Ji has a gentle and kind character, behaves with dignity and integrity, and treats patients well. The head nurse of the 5th hospital is more attentive to patients and provides them with more assistance. The young man suggested that she had some kind of abilities, and apparently they were related to healing. In their world, abilities are not uncommon. For every 1,000 people, there is one person with a different kind of skill. Yet throughout history, there have been only a few people who have the ability to heal, and this ability cannot be compared to that of others in power. And the principles of its action go beyond what modern medicine can explain, because it is rather a miracle. Growth of severed limbs, healing of incurable diseases, and even the return of the soul. But the guy tried to understand why Jean Ji was secretly using his abilities on Xiao Meng, and why the girl wasn't getting better. At some point, a thought occurred to you, Guy, and he wondered if everything was as he thought. He assumed that there was some problem with her resurrection, but told himself that it was impossible to leave things like this anyway. But you also realized that everything would be completely different if he managed to learn her healing abilities. The young man's mind was clouded with all sorts of thoughts, and he saw around him various fragments of his life. Gue closed his eyes tightly and saw Jinji and Xiao Meng in front of him, as well as the nurse using her abilities. After 10 years of silence, the young man had to go deep-sea diving again. Gue was inside a transparent blue sphere that protected him from water. The protagonist still did not open his eyes and asked himself if he was really confident in his actions. At that moment, the air stopped flowing into the young man's lungs, and he opened his eyes wide in horror, realizing that he was suffocating. The hero was left alone with the dark and terrifying memories that haunted him. He narrowed his eyes and remembered that he had made a promise to himself 10 years ago. He promised himself that even if he could not atone for all the sins he had committed, he would certainly not open that door. But now, 10 years later, Gue thought completely differently. The beautiful Xiao Meng appeared before his eyes. The guy said that now he doesn't care what punishment awaits him, since he is ready for anything. The young man realized that now he had only one way out, and this way was not at all simple. Gue will have to make concessions and find the key to salvation, because his goal is to penetrate her body. After deep immersion, some time passed, and the young man began to open his eyes. The hero lay in the children's room, the sun shining brightly through the window, warming him with its rays. He tried to figure out where he was. The young man tried to come to his senses and wondered if this was really a deep-sea dive. Guy turned his gaze to the mirror standing next to the bed and saw a girl with white hair there. His pupils dilated in surprise because he found himself in the body of a charming girl with red eyes. The girl was wearing a luxurious black dress with red patterns and was writing something in her diary. Gue decided to check the cute girl's figure and got up from the table where she was sitting. He immediately began to wave his arms from side to side to get a little more comfortable with the body and get used to it. Little Jean crossed his legs because he couldn't control his body the first time. But still, after a few seconds, you said that it seemed to work, but he didn't expect to go back so far. This whole situation alarmed the young man, and he felt a little ashamed because he had become a child. The hero had not been in a deep dive for a long time and must have forgotten everything, because nothing like this had ever happened. The young man in the girl's body screamed and wondered how he ended up being a little girl. The first level skill is deep diving, and through the subconscious you can transfer your soul into the body of another person. A person will retain his personality and will be able to freely play the role of another person, consciously changing the past. And besides all this, a person has the ability to even completely change the existing reality. Gue told himself that such air quality and sunlight clearly couldn't be found in their city. It was most likely a big city. This guy also said that, as far as character goes, he never saw Sister Jean outside of the hospital. But apparently she is from a wealthy family, while the hero was looking at a happy childhood photo of his sister. He couldn't imagine what she had to face in the past when she found herself in their poor town. Suddenly, Gue, who had taken the form of a little girl, grabbed the nail sticking out of the frame with his finger. He looked at the injured finger with interest and told himself that now was the time to try. The young man plucked up his courage and decided to use healing to heal the wound. But it turned out that Jean was too young for this skill, and you decided to just go with the flow until she gained the ability to heal. He wanted to read books on medicine, but then he told himself that the girl was still too young for this. Little Jean Ji did not want to study at all, but she really wanted to play because the weather was beautiful outside. Gue realized that the deep-sea dive had gone well enough that he was able to control his body. If he ignores the will of the original owner, the consequences may be irreparable. The hero also realized that no one should guess his true identity. Jinji decided to go outside to play. The little girl's diary remained open and lay on the table in her room. The palace where little Jinji lived was huge in area. In the corridor, there was a long red carpet. Gue, who had taken the form of a girl, looked down from the porch and found that there was no one downstairs, so it was possible to go out. Suddenly, someone quickly passed behind the girl, which alerted her. Her heart began to beat faster with excitement, and she turned around, all in a sweat, to find out what had happened. Little Jinji looked and thought. Perhaps it was Sister Anna who was watching her. Gue, in the body of a little girl, also thought to himself that it seemed like someone had actually been here. Jinji came out from behind the wall, and in front of her on the wall hung a huge portrait of a man with a stern look. The insightful Gue immediately realized that behind the huge portrait there might be a button hiding that led to another room. While in the girl's body, He moved the photograph aside and pressed the red button hidden behind it. A door opened in front of the girl, leading down the stairs into a gloomy room. She decided to overcome her curiosity and go down the steps. The smell that filled the room seemed very strange to Guy, and he told himself that something was clearly wrong here. Beads of sweat were running down Jinji's face, and the boy told himself that the situation was turning out a little differently than he had imagined. Finally, the girl reached the end of the stairs and heard someone's voices behind the wall, which made her stop. She realized that it was Sister Anna and Uncle Lo, who were discussing the success of the operation among themselves. The uncle told his sister that he was very worried, but she reassured him by saying that there was no one in the corridor either. Lo told Anna that since she was doing this for the first time, he could give her some advice as he had a lot of experience. Jinji ran her fingers across the table, and Guy thought to himself that there was no dust, but it was obvious that they did not come here to clean. This question deeply puzzled him, and he still could not find a worthy answer to it. Suddenly, out of fear, little Ji opened her eyes wide and saw the horrors that the adults were committing. The girl watched as her uncle and sister Anna performed a strange operation on a man. Little Ji sweated, realizing that their patient was Adric, and realizing that the woman needed a new teacher. The girl fell to the floor and covered her head with her hands, realizing the full horror of what was happening and tormented by the memories. She remembered how Adric came one day and said that from today on he would teach her instead of teacher Carl. He said he understood her feelings, but he needed to try to start learning. Guy realized that these were Jin's memories. Jinji's face was distorted with horror, and she had absolutely no idea what was happening to her. Taking a few steps back, she suddenly stepped on someone's foot with her heel and stopped. At that very second, the girl turned around to see who was standing behind her, and fear was visible in her eyes. Behind Jinji stood a tall blonde man in a medical gown, and the girl was terribly scared because she realized that it was her father. A resident of one of the apartments poured her drink into a trash can while standing on the balcony. The liquid spilled onto the garbage bags lying in the trash can, from which a strong stench emanated. Meanwhile, Guy, gasping for breath, opened his mouth and eyes wide, his face distorted with panic. The young man lay on the floor, completely unaware of what had happened to him, and tried to breathe. After a few seconds, he finally came to his senses and mentally told himself that he had been kicked out. Guy decided to take a shower to fully come to his senses and think about what had happened. He certainly had his suspicions about Sister Jean's mysterious past, but the actual development of events turned out to be different. Considering that he acted at her behest, it is quite possible that she actually witnessed this event in the past. After some time, Guy finally finished the water treatments and turned off the water. He stepped out of the shower stall, covered himself with a light towel, and prepared to go and rest. There is still too little information, so Guy is not sure that it is possible to begin studying healing right now. Suddenly someone started breaking into the young man's house, asking if he was home. Guy realized that it was Mistress Anderson and immediately began to put on his t-shirt because he realized that she came for money. The income from his part-time job is not enough to cover his medical debts, so he had to take out a loan. Guy was sweating because it wasn't just Mistress Anderson standing in front of him. The door was being held by several thugs, and the young man thought to himself that things were bad. A crowd of thugs immediately attacked the young man, intending to throw him to the floor. A few seconds later, Guy was already lying on the floor and calmly told the bandits that he would explain everything to them. But they weren't going to listen to this guy's stories, so one of them sprayed him in the face with a can. The young man lost consciousness, but came to after a while, which surprised this bastard. One of the bandits asked Brother Yu if he understood why he was here and in such a state. Guy, dying, told his brother that he had to wait until his silver key was brought from there. But no one was going to listen to the young man's stories, as a result of which he received a slap in the face. The bandits immediately began to mock the guy and offered to see what color his pants were. The main scumbag said that he is not interested in men, so there is absolutely no point in looking at his pants. He also said that, in addition, he had no evidence of how much money Guy would be able to return. One of the bandits, holding a knife in his hand, asked the young man if he knew what this code word meant. At one point, he stuck out his long tongue, loudly declaring that he knew more about kidneys than anyone else. 100 meters away from them, a glowing silhouette of a girl was visible, standing motionless and watching what was happening. A robber with a long tongue was about to stab Guy, who owed them huge sums of money. The young man's face at that moment was incomprehensible, and his emotions were completely contradictory. The girl with dark blue hair said that it would be a mistake to shed so much blood over this, so she would help him. But with a slight smile, the beauty added that she would do it not just like that, but with interest. One of the bandits said that this was Meng's lawyer, and he felt that she was already aware of all the events and would be here soon. He also said that she was the only one doing business here under her own name, but Meng replied that she was just lucky with the people she knew. She also said that with money everything is solved much easier, but the bandit replied that this was true, although he did not understand something. He said that given brother Yu Gui's connections, how come no one has crossed paths with her? And is there anything he doesn't know? The lawyer approached the young man, hanging upside down, and placed both hands on his head. The bandit asked not to look at him like that, because there had been some good moments, and his nerves had not been shaken by the nights of 10 years ago. Lawyer Meng put her mouth to Yu Gui's ear, asking the silent young man if this was true. After some time, the young man was released, after which they went for a walk. In the evening the city was shining and shimmering with colors, and young people were leisurely strolling along its streets. Lawyer Man bought 2 cans of soda to drink and talk, but the shy Yu Gui thanked her and refused, to which the girl replied that she had given all 200,000 yuan. The guy said he didn't want to take it, but Xiaoming found herself in a hopeless situation and promised to find a way to return the money. The lawyer said that he could have asked her earlier, but he preferred to approach him without even contacting her. The blue-eyed girl asked if she remained in his memories as that cheerful and sometimes uncontrollable girl. Yu Gui asked her not to say this, because today she came to his aid, and it was not easy for her to stir up the past. The girl crossed her legs, lightly tapping her heel on the asphalt. Straightening her jacket, the lawyer said that nostalgia for the past had nothing to do with it. Moreover, the money she gave to Wu Tiao for him today will return to her in a different form in half a month at most. Yu Gui said, almost emotionlessly, that he understood everything and asked what role he played in her scenario. Meng said that over the past few years, since the Xiaoming incident, he has been constantly going to the hospital. Yu asked how this related to Xiaoming, but the girl asked him not to worry and said that she was only interested in the hospital. She said that he might take this money as a reward, and she needed his help in investigating the case. The lawyer began her story to the young man, stating that all this was happening in the hospital where Xiaoming was located. She said that there was some secret organization operating in this hospital, and it was Brother Wu Tiao. At the end, the lawyer, stunned, stated that some secret organization was illegally trading in corpses. Yu Gui threw the white paper wrapper on the ground, preparing to put on the mask he took out from there. The young man began to put on a pink mask with cute pictures on his face, mentally imagining Meng Jishu. The girl asked him to hide the wounds, otherwise his face would swell, and he would be too noticeable. Yu Gui began to walk the streets where bandits committed their atrocities and called this world strange. One of the bandits hit the man, whose body was covered in bruises, with a heel and ordered him to get out of there. She saw a guy passing by and asked him with displeasure if he really thought he could get away unharmed if he had already reached her. The beaten man grabbed Yu Gui by the leg and begged him to lend him money, but he replied that it was not worth bringing himself to such a state. He told himself that in chess the worst choice for either side would be to give up a move to see what the opponent did. He also told himself that, although it was absurd, even such scenes were not uncommon in reality. Yu Gui desperately convinced himself that they would never be able to atone for their sins. Walking down the street, he heard the shouts of bandits, and at some point he lowered his desperate gaze. A girl with charming long gray hair, fluttering in the wind, ran up to him. She ran up to Yu Gui and clung to him, because she was very afraid, because the bandits did not spare anyone. The guy looked into her eyes and was about to say something, because she seemed familiar to him. The sweet blue-eyed girl looked at the guy with tears in her eyes and distrust. Yu Gui silently looked into her eyes, not meaning anything bad towards her. Tears were streaming down the girl's cheeks, and her gaze was full of extreme distrust of this guy. She immediately started running so that no one could catch up with her, and Yu Gui watched all this with bewilderment. The bandits were searching the street because it was important for them to find the girl, but one of them realized that it seemed she had escaped. The gray-haired man nervously asked where she could have gone and said that the girl was as impudent as her mother. He saw Yu Gui passing by and boldly asked him if he had seen a girl there. Yu pretended not to know which girl he was talking about, but the man said that she looked 15 years old and had big eyes. When the girl's age became known, Yu Gui asked the man how this was possible and whether he was really abnormal. He told the bandit that if he found her, he would give him a 50% discount, but he refused his offer. At the end, he also asked what kind of mask the guy had on his face, but Yu asked what was wrong with that and what was wrong with him loving children. The trio of bandits continued to move forward, and their leader ordered to look for the girl because she could not have gone far. Yu Gui quietly told the girl that she could come out of hiding since they had already left. But the girl didn't come out, and the guy decided to look into the trash can and realized that she had left. He put his hands in his pockets and started to walk away, calling her a wild, wounded cat, and she secretly watched him from around the corner. The sweet blue-eyed girl desperately wiped away her tears because she didn't know what to do next. The bright moon was reflected in her bottomless eyes, and tears of despair and hopelessness flowed down her cheeks. The night flew by unnoticed, and the next morning Yugue was already in the hospital. Jinji treated his ear, and he twitched and asked her to be gentler because it hurt. His sister said that he was already so grown up, but he just couldn't bear the pain, and you just press his ear to himself. Jean applied an antiseptic wipe to him, saying that he was clearly far away from Xiaoming. Yugue thanked Sister Ji for saving him money to treat his wounds. The genie asked if he was getting into anything dangerous to cover the expenses, and the guy replied that it wouldn't be easy anyway. Yu inquired about her income and asked if her salary was enough, since it was not particularly high for nurses. Jinji continued to go about her business with a smile, and Gue asked if she lived alone and if she needed help with her parents. She replied that they had earned enough and asked why he decided to find out about her, since usually he only cares about his sister. Yugue said that he wanted to know more about her because she helps his sister and he doesn't even know how best to thank her. But Jinji only smiled and told the young man that there was no need to thank him. It was suddenly announced that Chief Jiang, who was already on his way to the office, would conduct a general inspection of the hospital. The nurses rushed in all directions, as they needed to respectfully greet the venerable abbot. Chief Jiang walked past the nurses with a serious face, holding a folder with important documents in his hands. He stopped at the bed where Xiaoming's sister was lying, and Yugue addressed him politely. Jiang said that she had been suffering from vanishing soul syndrome for 5 years, and Jean confirmed it and transferred her to them a year and a half ago. Yugue asked the head doctor if his sister would recover, to which he replied that the indicators were normal, but they needed to prepare for the worst. Jinji looked at the men shaking hands and said no. They looked at her with bewilderment, but she said with a smile that she would not allow her patient's health to worsen. Yugue wondered in his mind what was going on because he felt like Sister Jean was trying to get Jiang's attention. There were many hospital staff standing at the door, wanting to talk to Chief Jiang. Sister Jinji silently looked out the window, admiring the beauty of nature and reflecting on life. She placed her palm on the window and told Yugai that he had waited for this for 5 years, so he should not lose hope so easily. Even if Xiaoming's vital signs were ever reported to be deteriorating, he should not take it to heart. At some point, she turned her gaze to Yugue and asked him in a serious voice not to sign. The young man looked at her, after which Jinji said that it was impossible to sign consent to transfer the remains for research. She looked into Yugai's eyes with a sincere smile, as if she hadn't said anything to him just a few seconds ago. The young man's gaze was half surprised, half confused by the situation. You recalled how the lawyer asked him to help with the investigation and realized that everything was connected. The girl with long ears continued to run, drenched in sweat, because she was afraid to stop. She was very out of breath and told herself that she was still being watched, so she couldn't stop. The girl moved her legs nonstop, afraid to stop even for a split second. She felt that this indescribable creature was still there, and it continued to haunt her. But she could not find the reason for this and only looked around in horror to make sure that it was still there. While jogging, she wondered if this was one of the customers she had laughed at. She also suggested that it was an assassin sent by those whose deal she had accidentally witnessed. An endless stream of assumptions came in her head, but at some point she finally stopped and hid behind a wall. She looked back and told herself that the monster had disappeared and wondered if she had really managed to break free. The breathless girl said that she had apparently had a great time and decided that she would not return home from work alone anymore. The girl continued walking forward along the dark street, saying that the Xiaoqing area was very dangerous that night. The next morning it was cloudy outside, and an investigation was underway near the motel. A black and gloomy crow, standing on a crumpled tin can, was collecting slop from a torn garbage bag in its beak. One of the police officers reported that the victim was a woman whose registration information was missing. He also added that the records indicated the name ID and the age of 20 full years. The stern investigator, holding a smoldering cigar in his hands, said that, most likely, she was 16 years old. The police officer asked how he knew whether he had determined the sex by the development of secondary sexual characteristics or by the pubic bone. Squad leader Wang Nanshao replied that they were simply cheaper than 18-year-olds and much easier to control. The young officer said that the deceased had no obvious injuries, but there were many bruises, and the cause of death was hemorrhagic shock. He said that it seemed that the devil was specifically targeting specific women every time. Furthermore, the young policeman said that in this case he had several questions, but the commander spanked him. Wang Nanchao said that no matter how low the victim has fallen, it is no reason to judge them, especially at such a time in Xiaoqing district. The commander narrowed his eyes sternly and said that there was a man who really should be punished to the full extent of the law. With his eyes reddened with rage, he said that it was the main character who made the world what it is. Two policemen saw something strange and exclaimed that there was something else there, thereby attracting the attention of the squad leader. Wang Nanchao turned around and walked towards them, wondering if there were any more victims left. Beads of sweat ran down his face from intense excitement, but he saw that the girl was still alive. A cute blue-eyed girl in a short dress was fast asleep on the grass, and the commander understood this. He decided not to disturb her and let her sleep a little, but after a while the girl woke up from the sun's rays. She slowly opened her bottomless blue eyes, trying to understand what was happening around her. The girl was stunned because there were strangers around her, and she became very wary. Squad leader Wang Nanchao handed her a bottle of water, asked if everything was okay, and offered her some water too. He became embarrassed and said he didn't know whether it was due to the terrible reputation of the police in the area or simply a lack of trust. He said that in any case, she should know that if she met someone like him, nothing bad would happen. The girl stood up and asked to be left alone because she had drunk a lot the night before. Wang Nanchao said that she was lucky because there was a killer in the area, and thinking about it, he noted that she looked younger than the previous victim. He told the girl that she should be careful and not go out late at night so that her parents would not worry. His words about home and parents touched the girl, and, gritting her teeth, she was about to say something to Wang Nanchao. The squad leader was very serious at that moment, but the girl said that she had neither a home nor parents. In her thoughts, she recalled the past and told herself that if it had not been for that incident, she would probably have been the same height. The police officer said he could contact social workers if the girl was an orphan, but the girl screamed that she would not go anywhere. Just as she was about to run away, Wang Nanchao grabbed her hand tightly, preventing her from escaping. His action shocked the girl, and she screamed, begging him to let her go, Wang Nanchao said that she could take care of herself and asked if she was just lacking temporary desire. He looked sincerely into her eyes, instilling confidence and showing that he could be relied upon. The sweet blue-eyed girl shed a tear, looking into the eyes of the squad leader, as if realizing that he could be trusted. Wang Nanchao let go of the cute girl's hand and tried to move it because her hand was a little numb. She didn't pay much attention to the hand because she was thinking about trusting the policeman. The girl continued to move her fingers, after which she was able to straighten her palm normally. Wang wrote the address on his palm and said, "When she arrives, then I should go to my aunt on the 3rd floor and say it's from Xiaowan." The girl wasted no time and went to the indicated address. She introduced herself to Nanchao as Tao Hualing. After some time, Tao arrived at the specified address, once again checking it against the inscription on her palm. As she walked up the stairs, Hualing wondered if she could really trust this policeman. She remembered how the man told her that he and Uncle Gio had been friends for several decades, so he definitely would not offend her. These memories caused pain to the girl, and she told herself that at that time, she had heard many similar promises. The only difference was that every time they touched, she immediately felt sick, which did not happen when she met the policeman. Tao Hualing decided to try first, and, if something went wrong, she would just run away. She continued to climb the steps when she suddenly smelled a pleasant and enticing aroma of food. The aroma seemed to attract her attention, as she froze for a few seconds, enjoying it, because she was hungry. Tao couldn't continue walking and told herself that she smelled like steamed buns with shiitake mushrooms added. Hualing said that no one cared about the feelings of a person who had not eaten for 2 days, and she should not have refused the bread offered by the policeman. Suddenly, the door next to which the girl was standing opened, and Yu Gui came out with a bag of steamed buns. The young people looked into each other's eyes, stunned by the recognition of each other. Tao Hualing immediately rushed up the stairs because she was very afraid of Yu Gui. The young man looked after her silently, not quite understanding why she was so afraid of him. After some time, Tao Hualing's legs became tired, so she decided to rest for a while. Tears flowed from her eyes, and, wiping them away, she could not understand what had happened and why everything was happening this way. Hualing sat down on the floor and realized that he was again being haunted by some strange feeling that had been bothering her. She remembered Yu Gui's face and said that there was a familiar aura of kindness emanating from this man. His face was exactly preserved in her memories both with and without the mask, so Tao said that she could not be mistaken. She convinced herself that it had definitely been him last night, the kind man in the child's mask. Anderson told Tao Hualing that Xiao Wang was not like everyone else, and although he did not return to live here, he paid the rent every month. The girl was embarrassed and sat silently, looking away, while her aunt tried to remember what she wanted to say. At this point, she said that it was forbidden to have pets and asked if she was raising a cat, to which Tao replied no. Ms. Anderson also asked her to always lock her doors, as their area was far from peaceful. She looked into the girl's eyes with concern, because she really wanted all troubles to pass her by. Tao Hualing looked into her aunt's eyes with special attention and remembered everything she said. Yugue asked if Mrs. Anderson had had dinner and offered to try her fresh buns. The woman asked if Xiaoyu was okay and said that she had received death threats last night, so she had no choice. Yugue smiled and said that everything was fine and that he had talked to them, so they would not bother her anymore. The young man put the buns on a plate and asked the new girl's name, to which the girl introduced herself as Tao Hualing. Yugue held a fragrant bun in his tongs and asked the girl if she wanted to try his creation. He is confident because his sister was a picky eater, and not without reason, since Anderson praised the young man's wonderful buns. Tao Hualing felt awkward, but she still took Yugue's bun and was about to try it. The girl's bottomless blue eyes widened after she took a bite because the buns were so delicious. Tao's cheeks flushed slightly with pleasure, and Yugue smiled and asked her to take her time and eat slowly. Hualing tried to say something to the young man, and he replied that he would leave them a plate of buns because he had more at home. The girl slowly ate the fragrant bun, and for a moment, Xiao Tao appeared before her eyes. Generous Yuge told the sweet girl with a smile that from now on they would be neighbors, but the girl was very attentive at that moment. In her imagination, she was sitting on a leather sofa and asking him to take care of her, while a man stood next to the sofa. After some time, Yugue returned home and leisurely ate a homemade bun. He was eating a bun and, while talking to Xiaoming via video call, asked her what they talked about earlier. Xiao, holding a glass of red wine in her hand, said that she also wanted to try the buns and asked him to send them to her. She said that Yugue talked about the hospital director, Jiang Qi, and also about the nurse who always takes care of the patients. The guy said her name was Jin Ji. She didn't give her name directly, but she very clearly hinted at certain problems in the hospital. Xiaoming asked if he suspected that the leader was up to something bad, to which Yugue replied that he had very little information. The girl asked him to come closer to the head, and the young man asked how he could do this. Xiaoming sarcastically remarked that his charm could help him, but Yugue asked her to leave. The girl crossed her legs and said that he could do otherwise. The decision was his alone. In the end, she said that she only needed the results of the study, and as soon as possible. Yugue only looked down dispassionately and told himself that, as he had expected, it was no longer possible to leave the game. In the city, nothing has ever been free for the lower classes because everyone is trying to make money off of someone else. The reason it was chosen was because it was intended from the outset that it would be used for deep-sea diving. Yugue told himself that as the situation showed, he had no other choice, and if Sister Jingji was being manipulated, he had to deal with it. In the end, he realized that he could decide everything himself, and he told Xiaoming that he would do everything himself. Yugue stood up from his computer desk and told himself that for him, this was just one of the side quests. He called it a secondary mission because there are things much more important than this. Memories came flooding back to the young man, and he literally immersed himself in them for a while. Tao Hualing suddenly woke up and stared at the ceiling in fear because she didn't understand anything. She said that she heard some strange sound, as if a drop of something had fallen somewhere. Tao was about to get out of bed and check what had happened because she thought the sound was coming from behind the door, namely, in apartment number 202, on the side where Yugue lives, who treated her to a bun. Once upon a time, there lived a girl named Wuju. She was very kind, generous, and had beautiful golden hair. The lady lived at the very top of the tower, and whenever her mother called her, she would let down her long hair. Until one day, a guy she didn't know climbed into the tower, holding onto his mother's hair, and, according to him, turned out to be a prince. Yugue found himself in the body of little Jin Ji again, and the girl opened her eyes in fear. The young man realized that the voice had just returned, and that it was coming from the girl lying in bed. He moved his hands and told himself that he had become a child again, but he could not remember how it all ended. He tried to delve into his memories to remember how it all ended last time. Yugue said that it was obvious that someone was interfering with his memories, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. In his memories, there was little Jin Ji, whose eyes showed horror and fear from what she saw. Suddenly, someone's shadow began to approach the curtain behind which there was a little girl. The shadow was rapidly approaching, ready to pull back the curtain and enter Jin Ji's room. The prince was young and attractive, but the girl looked at him and involuntarily began to think. Suddenly, Jin Ji's eyes widened and she screamed in intense fear. A fair-haired man wearing glasses and a medical gown asked what was wrong with her, and if she should go to sleep already. Yu-Gue immediately remembered the suspicious blonde man and tried again to understand why it was him. Jinji was very scared by his appearance and did not know what to do, because she thought that he wanted to harm her. But the man in glasses only put his hand to the girl's head, without intending to harm her. He began to gently run his finger over Jinji's head, and at that moment the girl calmed down and began to close her eyes. The man said she didn't have a fever and asked if one story was enough, to which Jin didn't answer. She said that she was very thirsty, so she asked him to bring her some water, and the man touched her forehead again. He covered her with a blanket and said that he would go for water and asked her not to get out of bed anymore. Yu-Gue tried to understand what was going on and wondered if this man really intended to harm Jinji. At some point, the man turned around and was about to ask the girl something, who became scared again. He asked Jinji how she liked the new teacher, to which she only sweated with excitement. After some time, the blonde brought the girl hot water and said that she could drink it safely. Jin saw her reflection in the crystal clear water, and Yu-Gue, being in her body, tried to understand why he suddenly asked about the teacher. Most of Jin's memories are blurry, and Yu only knows that after the incident with Ardelic, teacher Leia came. In truth, Ardelic essentially also replaced Carl's grandfather, who suddenly disappeared. A fair-haired man with glasses asked little Jinji if she liked the new teacher. The girl replied that Lady Leia was very kind and patient, and promised to bring fruit from her hometown. But Jinji still asked why Ardelic didn't come, since classes with him were more productive. The man replied that he was not feeling well, so he returned home and would perhaps return as soon as he recovered. Yu-Gue realized that this was a lie, but tried to understand why he continued to do this when the secret was already revealed. These thoughts did not leave the young man, because he was very curious to solve this mystery. He tried to understand what happened after the memories suddenly ended. Suddenly someone called the man in the medical gown, and the phone vibrated in his pocket. He ordered to provide emergency assistance, stabilize the patient's condition, and wait, since he himself would perform the operation. He told Jinji that it was impossible to put her to bed today, because she had to undergo a complicated operation and needed to return to the hospital. The girl just smiled sweetly at her father and said that everything was okay because she could sleep alone. Judging by the memoirs, more than one generation of the Jingji family was engaged in medical practice, and the very first beginning was laid during Nightingale's lifetime. Her father runs a hospital and is one of the best surgeons in the world, having received 5 medals for his work. Yu-Gue told herself that, fortunately, her father had not yet shown his true colors, so it was too early to draw conclusions. At first it seemed to him that difficulties would arise only with playing the role of the girl, but now it looks like a romance. Jinji looked out the window out of boredom and suddenly saw something beautiful on the horizon. The girl began to look out the window with interest, and you realized that it looked like a traveling circus. But after that he wondered if the girl wanted to go to the circus because she was bored. In the end, Jinji really wanted to see the traveling circus. She was very bored and wanted to have some fun, and Yu-Gue began to think about what he could do with her. The young man thought, because before going to the circus, he needed to take her outside the estate. Yu-Gue wanted to simply call this novel Little Jing-ji's Escape Plan, Part 2. The girl successfully climbed the stairs, and Yu told himself that this was already his personal record. Jing-ji, full of inspiration and confidence, ran towards the exit without thinking about the consequences, because she wanted to have fun. Yu-Gue said that if the girl's memories were to be believed, then by this time the butler and maids should already be resting. Now, the main character only has to figure out how to get past the guards at the gate unnoticed. Jinji looked at the horizon with a gleam in her eyes, because she knew that the path was clear for her. But everything did not go as she wanted, because the senior servant in a black dress was standing in the courtyard. She is present in the memories, but she never appeared on the second floor, and had virtually no contact with Jinji. The girl looked at the senior, maid in surprise, and opened her eyes wide, realizing that there was no way out. Yu-Gue couldn't understand how this was possible and wondered if he really was seeing double. The head maid turned her attention to Lady Jinji and politely asked if they needed anything. The girl continued to look at her and try to find words, but in the end she said that she didn't need anything. The maid told Jinji that it was time to rest because it was already late. The little lady gently took the maid by the hand, after which they were to enter the room. The maid did not understand why the girl was pulling her hand and looked at her with some bewilderment. Jinji didn't want to go to bed at all and only said the word circus, making it clear that she wanted to see it. Yu-Gue didn't understand why, but after seeing this woman's face, he suddenly had an idea. Jinji asked the head maid if she could take her to see the traveling circus. Yu-Gue came to the conclusion that this woman would agree to absolutely any of his adventures. The circus security guard told the girls that today's performance was already over, and they could come tomorrow morning. Yugue thought to himself that in his place right now, absolutely anyone would be disappointed. Jinji looked down at the floor in despair and let go of the red ball that the head maid had bought for her. She said sadly that apparently nothing could be done and suggested going back. The maid looked into the girl's upset eyes and realized that she could not allow her to be sad. Suddenly, she moved sharply, after which a rather loud sound was heard. The maid skillfully used the deadly flying knife technique to encourage Jinji. After this, the woman jumped through a ring of fire, which was called an aerial acrobatics technique. The circus performer then performed a trick on a unicycle, which surprised Jinji. Yugue, seeing all this, said that he seemed to be beginning to understand, but the maid continued to play her tricks. The young man began to understand why this day was so special in Jinji's memories. After some time, the senior maid took the sweet girl by the hand, and they headed towards the house. At certain moments, even Yugue's emotions, the emotions of an outside observer, find a response in her soul. And things got to a big point, but the young man's thoughts were interrupted because the girls had already returned to the house. At the gate of the Jingji family estate stood the girl's father, holding his hands in the pockets of his robe and silently waiting for them. The maid covered the girl's back, saying that she could handle it herself because it was not her business. Jinji's father smirked and snapped his fingers using the blue beard technique. The girl standing behind the senior maid became very scared as strange things began to happen. Father came up to them and said that he already thought that Jinji had gone down to the basement again. Yugue realized that he had deliberately let him hear this urgent call from the hospital, which meant that he had not even left the estate. The senior maid was ready for extreme measures and decided to take out a sharp blade that she hid under her dress. Father said that, of course, he does not deny that after the last time she already remembers something. It was late and deep night outside, and the moon and the stars together illuminated the earth. The head maid calmly looked into the eyes of Jinji's father and said that his daughter remembered something. The girl asked her father what he meant and what she should not remember from his words. The head maid bowed her head and stood silently behind Jinji's father while he talked to his daughter. The father asked his daughter, who taught her to speak in such a tone, whether she had really decided to stop playing the role of good girl. Jinji asked her father if he really didn't trust her anymore and why she had to pretend. She said that everything needed to be cleared up once and for all, but it only concerned the two of them, so others could not be involved in it. A man in a medical uniform asked her if she had noticed how she had dragged the maid into this. Yugue tried to understand whether all these people, including Ardelic, suffered because of their connection with Jinji. The girl asked her father if he was really going to treat the maid the same way as the others, just because she had the misfortune of meeting her. Yugue couldn't understand why he needed this, whether it was because he wanted to remain the only one she had, or for some other reason. Jinji turned her back to her father because she didn't want to talk to him at all. The man took out a sharp blade and said that he seemed to understand everything that was happening around him. Father told Jinji that it turned out that everything looked exactly like that to her, and it was not surprising, since it explained many oddities. He said that he seemed to have underestimated her centuries-old curse, to which the girl asked with interest what curse he was talking about. The man believed that separating the blood relatives would be enough to weaken the curse, but their family turned out to be extremely strong. He said that they would consider this a disproof of the hypothesis, and Yugue tried to understand if she was really so afraid that he would do something to her. At that very moment, the owner of the body suddenly found herself in front of a man, namely, her father. Jinji could not allow her father to harm the maid, and she was overcome with an overwhelming desire to kill. The girl's treacherous father was going to use one of his methods to deal with the maid. He snapped his fingers and said that he was using Rapunzel's technique, which was considered one of the most powerful. At this moment, Jinji's eyes widened in fear as she realized what would happen next. The girl ran up to her father to pounce on him and prevent his insidious plans, but she was not so strong. Yugue was thrown aside, losing control of the girl's body, which plunged him into a strong daze. The young man realized that it was a suggestion technique that caused him to lose control of his body. Jinji's father told him that he had neglected his fatherly duties for too long, so he would have to take drastic measures. He took a lock of his daughter's hair and, expressing deep regret, prepared to cut it off, but the girl stood frozen in a daze. At that very moment, my father's sharp knife cut off a lock of shiny and charming white hair. The charming hairs fell one after another, as if falling into an abyss. Father told Jinji that he was very sorry, but her happy childhood and ignorance was over, and Yugue seemed to have fallen into the water. It was late at night outside, and Tao Hualing was also going through a hard time and could not sleep. She looked at Yu Gui's door through the slightly open door, trying to figure out what was going on here. Tao Hualing admitted to herself that she had unconsciously begun to worry about this man. Suddenly, the door of apartment number 202 opened slightly, producing an unpleasant creak. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing looked at what was happening with slight fear, not knowing what to expect. Yu Gui left the apartment and hurried somewhere, which alarmed the girl, since it was already late. She didn't understand why he was leaving again, because it was already too late for walks. After some time, Yu Gui got on the subway and was about to go to the hospital. He's like a whale that constantly needs to come to the surface to breathe air. The ability to dive to great depths overloads the brain, and it cannot maintain this state for long. And after leaving the water, cooling occurs. The dispatcher announced that the train was heading to the hospital station and emphasized that the exit to the platform was on the left side. Yu Gui told himself that no matter how urgent it was, he would have to wait at least a day to find out what would happen next. The main character entered the elevator and decided to go up to the 5th floor of the hospital building. Yu Gui wondered what kind of curse this man was talking about and what kind of relationship the father and daughter had with this maid. The young man realized that perhaps now he could learn something from Jinji herself. The nurse told Yu Gui that he was so late this time, and the young man asked Sister Zhang if Sister Jean was there. The nurse replied that she had asked for time off that evening and Manager Jiang had assigned her to do the job. These words made Yu Gui a little upset, and he thought even more, remembering Manager Jiang. He remembered that in the morning, the manager, while talking to Jinji, seemed to hint at his involvement in the sale of corpses from the hospital. Standing in front of the entrance to Zhang's office, Yu Gui told himself that since he had come, he should at least see him. To begin with, the protagonist decided to knock on the office door, after which the manager asked him to come in. With a smile, Yu Gui asked Manager Jiang if he was busy and said that they had seen each other this morning. The manager asked if he remembered correctly that Yu was Xiao Meng's relative, and the young man confirmed it. Jiang said with a smile that since he came to him so late, it meant that he was somehow connected with him. But Yu Gui looked at him with bewilderment, because he did not understand what he was talking about, and asked what the manager meant. Jiang said that he knows it is difficult for him to speak because it is human nature and can be understood. He also said that there is no shame in signing a refusal of treatment for a patient with soul loss syndrome. Yu Gui asked him if he had heard correctly, and Jiang, remembering Xiaoming, said about refusing treatment. The manager began to read the list, which mentioned 29-year-old Zhang Xiaotong with the same diagnosis. He spent about 1,500 days in the hospital, and the total treatment costs amounted to more than 1.5 million yuan. Then he began to read about the 27-year-old woman Zhang Li, and his face did not show any embarrassment. But all this irritated the protagonist, and he interrupted Manager Zhang's conversation with a shout. Yu Gui looked sternly into the eyes of the manager sitting opposite him, and asked what he meant by this. Jiang said that often people focus only on the initial misfortune, failing to notice the secondary consequences. He asked what would hit government funds harder, the loss of one worker or the loss of the same number of disabled people. Over the past 5 years, the increase in the number of patients who have lost their ability to work has had a negative impact on the state of society. Jiang said it looked like residual radiation and waste from a weapon of mass destruction. After these words, Yu Gui's gaze became even more stern, and he turned angrily to Manager Jiang. He slammed the table, shouted, and asked if he was sure that the words he had spoken really belonged to the doctor. Jiang responded that on a national scale, this is just one of the factors that is dragging the economy down. He also said that on a human level, these are just patients who are struggling for life and balancing between life and death. The manager asked Yu Gui in a calm tone if he was in a similar situation. The boy said that his life would be meaningless without Xiao Meng, and Jiang asked why he came to him at such a time. At some point, Yu Gui seemed to have an epiphany and began to contemplate the soul loss syndrome. He knows a patient he just met in the elevator, and he has the same diagnosis. Yu Gui remembered that the nurse in the elevator pressed the minus button on the 1st floor, and that's where the morgue is. The hero withdrew Jinji's request not to sign the consent form for the body to be handed over for autopsy under any circumstances. He also recalled that Meng's lawyer had spoken about the illegal trade in corpses at the hospital, and the young man wondered if it was true. Yu Gui asked whether Jiang persuades patients' relatives to refuse treatment to reduce the burden on staff. The manager replied that he would also like the relatives to be able to invest their funds in something more promising in the future. Yu Gui said that he really cared about them very much, and after his explanation, everything became clear to him. He said that tomorrow they would stop therapy, wait until her vital signs started to decline, and then just take her to the funeral home. After this, Yu Gui whispered into the manager's ear that they would eventually cremate Xiao Meng. The manager said that he would advise considering the option of transporting the body to the hospital. Jiang looked into Yu Gai's eyes and realized that he was acting unusually, which meant that he might be deceiving him. He called hospital security, where he was asked where the staff should go. But the main character did not allow him to do this and calmly applied Dr. Doolittle's technique. Manager Jiang's eyes widened in surprise, and he froze for a few seconds, looking at Yu Gai. After a few seconds, the surprise disappeared from his eyes, and he simply lowered his tired gaze. Manager Jiang told the security dispatcher not to come up and hung up. Yu Gai was a little happy to himself and said that his plan had succeeded. The protagonist began to reflect on the state of so-called deep immersion and its consequences. He said that this state was like a remote invasion of another person's personality. Reality, including the environment and other people, all this also belongs to the sphere of his own perception. That is, he not only entered Jinji's body, but everyone else also merged with him, adopting all their knowledge and the like. This list, of course, includes third-level superpowers, namely psychological suggestion. As for recommendations, it seems to be an improved version, superior in strength and duration of action. Jiang told Yu Gai that the payments had long since stopped, and if they continued to help the patient, the hospital itself would go bankrupt. The manager said that he was doing everything to avoid this. And anyway, hospitals were commercial organizations. Yu Gai asked if this was why he attracted patients' relatives to him, hoping that they would refuse treatment. But Manager Jiang calmly replied that it was just cost-cutting. He said that patients with this syndrome have all other vital functions in order, and this makes their bodies extremely valuable. Manager Jiang pulled the door handle to enter another room, and Yu Gai continued to follow him. The manager said that research on living organisms sounds very pretentious and that it is generally a dubious activity. Yu Gai looked around seriously and thought that all these people were still alive, and they all had the soul loss syndrome. He said that there was a very high probability that it was Mazu, under the leadership of Wu Tiao, who were selling the corpses on the black market. Yu Gai asked Manager Jiang if all these patients were men, to which he replied that they were, because girls were unreliable. Jiang said that over the years, there had been occasions when women's bodies had disappeared from the morgue. Almost never had it been possible to transport any of them. He said that if it weren't for Yu Gai's sister situation, they would have taken action long ago and lied to their relatives about the death. The protagonist became enraged and attacked the manager, grabbing him by the collar and pinning him against the wall. He shouted in anger that he did not even dare to do anything to Xiao Meng and threatened to kill him for this. The manager only replied in a calm tone that he would not do that, and Yu Gai gritted his teeth in anger. He let go of Manager Jiang's tie and said that he wanted to accompany today's convoy. The manager said there was no problem and added that he planned to personally accompany them, so he could go with him. Yu Gai looked at Jiang's back and thought to himself that even under hypnosis, he was perfectly aware of his actions, clearly aware of his inhumanity. The manager is firmly convinced of the rationality of his actions. Observing everything that was happening and listening to the dialogues, Yu Gai made some conclusions for himself. With a slight grin, he said that the further this goes, the worse it gets. All those accompanying the convoy got into the ambulance, and after some time, left this place. There were several guards armed with machine guns in the car. Yu Gai thought that the level of security here was much higher than that required for an ordinary hospital. Jiang said that female corpses disappear, but male corpses do not. And if that is the case, then why is he so nervous now? The ambulance driver slowed down because he needed to communicate something on the radio. He then lost his composure and radioed that they had left the safe zone. Everyone was told to be on guard, and beads of sweat ran down the faces of Yu Gai and Manager Jiang. The armed guards were prepared for any outcome, and the atmosphere in the car was tense. The ambulance was driving through the tunnel at high speed. The driver was extremely tense. The driver, being in an extremely tense state, was sweating and convincing himself that he could appear at any moment. Suddenly, an incomprehensible black and red creature appeared on the horizon, heading behind the car. The driver of the car looked in a mirror and saw a creature looking angrily at him, and he became even more nervous. The people in the car became very nervous, and the guards were ready to shoot. The situation became extremely tense, and loud knocks were heard from the back door of the car. The iron door was hit with force, and with each passing second more and more dents appeared on it. Within a minute, the dents increased in size, and the blows did not stop for a second. Finally, the iron door of the ambulance was pierced by the sharp claws of the demon. The demon dealt a crushing blow to the iron door, after which he flew to the side. Yu Gai watched everything that was happening silently, with an extremely surprised look, and did not know how to react to it. A demon in a black robe with red eyes appeared before the people, terrifying with his gloomy appearance. The two guards couldn't believe that there was a demon standing in front of them and tried to come up with a plan of action. The armed guards huddled together and prepared to open fire on the enemy, experiencing great excitement. At the same moment, they opened fire on the demon with all available weapons, but he managed to dodge. Their actions angered the demon, and with a sharp movement he grabbed one of the guards by the face with his sharp claws. The convoy security officer, a colleague of this man, was stunned because all this was happening before his eyes. The demon's eyes turned even redder, and he sternly looked into the eyes of the guard who had become his victim. The guard's eyes widened in fear, and he stood silently in place, not knowing what to do in this situation. Manager Jiang, with his mouth agape, thought to himself, in terms of physical fitness, a demon cannot compare to a human. The guards desperately tried to fight off the bloodthirsty demon, throwing themselves at him with all their strength, but their attempts were in vain. Yugui decided that he needed to save himself with all his might, grabbed the manager by the hair, and ran with him to the side. Looking at the back of the bloodthirsty demon, Yu told himself that this was not at all what he expected to see. At that same second, the demon turned around and looked at the main character, who was looking straight at him. He suddenly spread his arms out to the sides, intending to pounce on the young man. He scratched Yugui with his sharp claws, causing the protagonist to bleed from his face and hand. The young man was stunned because the attack was furious, but he tried his best to repel the enemy's attack. If it weren't for Jinji's ability to imitate the abilities of the head, made from his memories, he wouldn't have had a single chance of dealing with him. The ambulance driver lost control of the vehicle and screamed in fear. Bright sparks flew from under the wheels of the ambulance, and the driver managed to take control. Yugui was very nervous because he had almost no strength left to resist the enemy. The demon looked sternly into his frightened eyes and was about to deal a fatal blow. He clenched a strong fist and swung to finish off the main character and quickly escape. Yugui was unable to resist an opponent whose strength was many times greater than his own, and received a blow to the body. From the blow, he was unable to stand on his feet and began to quickly fall to the floor. The demon in the robe lifted the corpse of a man from the hospital and began to leave. Yugui came to his senses and asked Manager Jiang to answer honestly the question he would ask him. He asked how it turned out, and in fact secretly turned everything around so that one woman was lost among the corpses. Jiang admitted that this was so, and at first thought that in this way he could deceive the demon that was stealing the dead. Yugui was asked whether the previously missing women had been kidnapped by the demon, to which the demon replied that this was indeed the case. He said that because of him, their hospital had been unable to transport female corpses for a long time, and now they cost 25 times more than male corpses. Yugui asked him not to continue, and began to think whether the demon kidnapper was only interested in women. Meanwhile, the sun came out over the area where Tao Hualing lived, and the sky became clear and blue. Wang Nanchao scratched the back of his head with a smile and asked the girl if she thought he was a complete idiot for just bringing her things. He said that he hadn't lived with anyone for a long time, and single people have a freer life, so if it weren't for his colleagues, he wouldn't have remembered. Tao Hualing said that everything was fine and thanked him, and Nanchao said that she would sleep better every night. Ben said that he needed to go to the scene of the incident, and that if anything happened, she could call him, but the girl delayed him out of fear. She nervously said that she would return all the money spent on rent, food, and clothes within a month. Wang Nanchao asked her not to forget to tell him later how to find her, and then he would arrest those who gave her this task. He stroked her and asked her to enjoy every day while she was still a minor, and his touches did not even irritate Tao. Yugui, meanwhile, stood right next to the window where they were talking and covered his mouth with a yawn. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing looked at him and thought to herself, "This is the guy who lives next door." Yugui waved his hand and greeted his neighbors, smiled slightly at them, and went home. Tao Hualing greeted the young man and watched in silence as he entered the apartment. She wondered if he had really just returned and where he had been all this time because he looked exhausted. Wang Nanchao reported that he received a report from eyewitnesses about a suspicious person last night. He thoughtfully wondered whether the man who had just returned home had been at home the day before yesterday. But at some point he started smiling and said that he was talking nonsense because Tao had only moved in yesterday, so she couldn't know. Tao Hualing thought deeply and remembered her meeting with Yugui the night before last, when he had a pink baby mask on his face. It was already evening outside. The sun had set behind the horizon, and the moon began to illuminate the earth with its bright light. Yugui said that there has been progress in Meng Jishu's case, but compared to that, Jinji's situation requires active action. Something told him that the connection between these two cases might be much more serious than it seemed at first glance. Yu-Gue never rested and admitted to himself that he could barely stand on his feet, but now it didn't matter. He decided it was time to take advantage of the opportunity of deep diving and close his eyes tightly. After some time, the deep dive worked, and the protagonist found himself in Jinji's childhood. He opened his eyes, finding himself in the body of a sweet girl, trying to comprehend that he had managed to enter her. Yu-Gue began to move his body and wondered how much time had passed since he had dived. Little Jinji's body was the same as his. She was powerless and in an unhealthy state. In the girl's body, the main character began to walk around the room, while conducting a monologue in his thoughts. Jinji's behavior seemed very strange to Yu-Gue, and he did not understand what was happening to her. The little girl's eyes turned red, and the protagonist wondered what had happened to her during his absence. The original goal was to save his sister in order to immerse himself in Jinji's life and master her healing abilities. However, already during the first dive, the course of history imperceptibly changed its direction, and this was influenced by many factors. For the second time, the main character, Yu-Gue, saw with her own eyes how her measured life collapsed because of lies. The way her father cut Jinji's hair when she was very young was forever imprinted in his memory, and she was unable to resist it. And finally, for the third time, he plunged deeply into the body of little nanny Jinji. This place looks like some kind of special isolation ward. All these Gesell mirrors, someone must be watching his every move. Here it is on the Jinji time axis, and now, when we talk about the interval, we talk about years and not about weeks as before. The unknown man in white snapped his fingers while in the same room with Jinji. Yu-Gue wondered if the girl had been locked up here since he left last time. Jinji crossed her arms over her chest, and the main character decided to use healing. But the attempt again proved futile and ineffective, leading Yu-Gue to conclude that she had acquired this ability even later. He decided that since he would meet her again in the future, this was clearly not the end of her life, and he just needed to get out of here. Jinji shouted loudly that she wanted to talk about something and asked who was in charge here. She didn't know if anyone was watching her, since she was behind Gesell's mirror. Suddenly the mirror glowed with blue stripes, and Jinji was asked who she was. Yu-Gue realized that this was the prescribed interrogation procedure and wondered if they really wanted to test her clarity of mind. Jinji introduced herself in a calm tone, understanding the principle of the identity verification procedure. The system asked a second question about how many days the girl had been conscious. Jinji replied with a slight excitement that she remembered everything from the moment she came here. She waited for the third question, and the system finally began to formulate it, which happened very slowly. The girl was asked whether she would ultimately admit guilt for her actions. Jinji asked in bewilderment what she was guilty of and what was wrong with her actions. With a slightly trembling voice, she asked if it was their fault that they locked her in this room. Gesell's mirror glowed red, indicating anger directed at the girl. Yu-Gue became nervous, as did little Jinji, who was about to come up with a rescue plan. Tears began to flow from the girl's eyes, and her cheeks turned red with fear, which alarmed the main character even more. The room erupted into unbearable chaos, and Jinji began to be carried away. A red light filled the room. The radiation blinded the girl and prevented her from moving. Meanwhile, Tao Hualing was calmly going about her household chores, suspecting nothing. On the calendar, she marked with a red marker the days that were significant to her. Her washed everyday clothes, namely a striped sweater and a white skirt, hung on the hanger. Tao Hualing touched the almost dry clothes hanging in the sun, which made the girl happy. After smelling the washed clothes, the girl began to smile, because the smell of the washing powder was very pleasant. A few minutes later she got dressed, and, adjusting the collar of her sweater, became a little wary when she heard a knock on the door. Tao Hualing opened the door and saw Yu-Gue knocking on the door of a woman in a cap. The woman knocking asked if Yu-Gue was home, and Tao thought she had a good figure and character. She wondered if this young man was really so popular among women. Tao Hualing pulled the door handle to close the door and continued to do her personal business. But suddenly the door was opened by the girl who was knocking on Yu-Gu's door, which surprised Tao very much. The woman in the cap, frightened by the surprise, asked the girl if there was anyone there. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing asked with slight fear what she wanted, and the woman only replied that, as it turned out, she needed a girl. She asked with a smile if they would really talk through the crack in the door. Tao asked for forgiveness, and, mentally saying that the woman had a powerful aura, almost involuntarily fulfilled her request. The girl said she just wanted to ask if she knew the guy who lived across the street. Frightened, Tao Hualing awkwardly and not entirely confidently answered that she was familiar with her, but not very close. The blonde touched her hair with a smile and asked if she could give him something when they met. She smiled sweetly at Tao Hualing and asked her to tell Yugui that Jinji was looking for him. After she left for a while, Tao told herself that she hadn't actually seen Yugui since he came back the morning before yesterday. She became a little worried and wondered if he shouldn't at least be hungry since he never left the room. Although she just said that she knows him, he just helped her once, and who is she to worry about him? Although Tao Hualing thought so, she still asked Mrs. Anderson for a spare key. Some very strange feeling pushed her to move on, and the girl inserted the key into the door lock. At that moment, she opened the door to Yugui's room and noticed that the room was completely empty. She walked around the room and asked if the young man was at home, but there was no answer. On the wall, she saw a board with many different notes and photographs of the main character. Tao Hualing, seeing the photograph, said to herself that the woman looked like the one who had just arrived. The blue-eyed girl looked around a little and noticed something strange that surprised her. Tao Hualing's bottomless blue eyes reflected fear and horror after what she saw. Yugui was sitting on the floor in front of her, unconscious, and she immediately asked with tears if he was okay. Tao Hualing immediately approached the protagonist and began to try to bring him back to consciousness by touching him. She put her hand on his shoulder and tried to wake him up, but it didn't work at all. But suddenly Tao Hualing began to do something incomprehensible, and her eyes opened wide in fear. It seemed that she began to fall into the abyss, and, completely unaware of what was happening to her, the girl fell silently. She had a few seconds left before she would fall and be completely submerged in the water, and she continued to fall in confusion. Just a few seconds later, Tao Hualing fell into the water and quickly sank to the bottom. Yugui wondered if he had treated her badly, but the foolish girl followed him again. Tao Hualing began to suffocate underwater, unable to resist, and the man said that he did not need her. He is the only one she has left, at least in this world, and the voice has not died down for a long time. A huge school of fish flashed before Tao Hualing, swimming quickly in an unknown direction. The fish seemed to form a kind of sphere that protected the curious girl from death. Tao Hualing couldn't understand what was happening because she only remembered how she touched Yugui, and after that, her movements became unnatural. She had already experienced something similar once, and now everything around her seemed real. Not far from her, right in front of her, she saw a sphere shrouded in red light and shining brightly. Yugui was lying in the sphere, unconscious and showing no signs of life at that moment. Tao Hualing went to him because he looked completely unwell. She tried her best to swim to Yugui. Although it was difficult, the girl did not give up. Yugui sank to the bottom, like all the other drowned people who were under the illusion of deep immersion. Tao Hualing was not about to give up, and in the end her persistence paid off. She realized that the further she swam, the more difficult it was to overcome the resistance. But she still almost reached Yugui. When Tao was ready to grab the protagonist, he nevertheless broke free and quickly sank to the bottom. Hualing did not give up and tried to prevent his fall, but she succeeded with great difficulty. Yugui continued to sink to the bottom, unconscious, and the girl only watched in surprise. She tried to use one of her abilities to contact him. The first few attempts to use this ability were futile and ineffective. However, Tao Hualing managed to use her ability and stood behind Yugui, who was looking at the crying Jinji. She turned to the main character, who stood with his back to her. Tao asked Yugui if he was okay, and the grumpy protagonist simply turned around silently. The first few times his gaze was absolutely cold and dispassionate towards the girl. But after a few more seconds his gaze became extremely stern and at the same time tired. Yugui didn't know how much time had passed, but during this time, Jinji's hair had grown 3 times longer and had been cut. Jin stood silently in place, her upset gaze lowered to the floor, similar to the gaze of the main character in her body. Yugui began to remember his futile attempts to escape, and one of them was the examination by the doctor. On the doctor's iron tray were medical instruments, one of which was a pair of sharp scissors. For the first time, Yugui tried to take possession of something piercing and cutting and escape. But his opponent was too cautious and tied up Jinji so that she could not resist. Yugui tried everything he could think of, but it was all in vain. He never managed to get out of here. He himself cannot escape from this nightmare, and they are both imprisoned. When imprisoned under the influence of strong drugs, thoughts gradually slow down and consciousness begins to dissipate. The only thing that kept Yugui from drowning completely was his goal. This continued until he heard the scream of a little girl behind him. The protagonist looked at the girl and immediately realized that it was Tao Hualing who had found him. He couldn't understand why she, and whether she also had deep-sea diving skills and used them on him. Unshaven Yugui was about to say something to Tao Hualing, who found him, but the girl interrupted him. She asked him to shut up and said that she had more questions, so she would start asking them first. Tao asked Yugui who he was, where they were, and what this place that looked like a sea was. She also asked who this girl was and who he was related to, why he was now flying above her and looked like he had aged. Yugui looked at Tao Hualing in surprise, who was asking him questions with such curiosity. With a sincere smile, he replied that at first everything did not go very smoothly, but fortunately an element of surprise was introduced. Yu asked Tao Hualing to give him some time to think, and said that he would explain everything in order. After some time, she learned that he used deep diving, and this was not just a dream, but Jinji's past. Yugui said that she remembered this from the beginning, but his actions would still be influenced to some extent by Jinji's consciousness. This man has been under the influence of drugs for several years, and he too is beginning to lose touch with reality. Tao Hualing asked what was happening to her, because she was an ordinary person and had never heard of deep diving before. Yugui replied that, from her description, she made contact with him when he was in a state of deep immersion. He said that all these unusual abilities are spiritual power, and if it has potential, then it can find a response in him. Tao Hualing decided to join Yugui and lay down next to him to resonate. Yugui, in Jinji's body, stood by the wall, behind which were scientists in white coats. Tao Hualing said that she could pass through walls, and others would not be able to see her or catch her. The little girl told Yugui that she would come up with a plan of action and would definitely get him out of here. The protagonist convinced himself that no matter how he convinced himself, he could not deny that this was a selfish and irresponsible act. Only he had to pay for what was happening and experience remorse. There was no point in involving others in this. But Yugui was forced to admit that by this point the situation had gotten out of control and he could no longer cope alone. He told himself that now he could only save himself, and the salvation of Jinji was not in his hands, but in the hands of Tao Hualing. Yugui told her that they had only met a few times and were not acquainted at all, and asked why she should help him. He asked how she could be sure that he was telling the truth and was not up to no good, which made Tao Hualing think. The blue-eyed girl's cheeks turned red, and she replied with a smile that it was intuition. She said that she had never been particularly intelligent, but her intuition had never let her down in her life. Tao said that she didn't want to get involved in something that she didn't understand at all, but that she was the only one in the whole world who felt it. Yugui stroked her and said that in that case he would like her to find one person outside and give him a message. Little Tao Hualing and the protagonist in the body of young Ji looked at each other, carefully discussing all the details. Yugui said that if she heard it, she might have a chance to escape, and Tao said that she would not remember a message that was too long. But the main character said that the message would be very short, and she would definitely remember it. The young man clarified that there would be only one word, but it played a very important role. The maid in a black dress stood in her house and looked at the photograph of little Ji with pain in her soul. She lived in a huge palace, decorated with trees, and the rays of the sun brightly illuminated it. Butterflies fluttered in the green, charming garden, and birds sang in the estate. Little Tao Hualing arrived at the designated place at Yugui's request to deliver a message. The blue-eyed girl mentally said that she had finally managed to get out, and now she was in the right place. She really liked this place, and the warm sun, the bright scent of flowers and small animals complemented it. Tao told herself that for her this was a dream that would never come true, and a moment from her childhood flashed through her mind. But Hualing stopped short at that moment and said that now was not the time for such thoughts. She pushed off the ground with her tiny, graceful legs and then flew forward. Tao Hualing reminded herself once again that she had to follow Yugui's instructions first. She asked him why he was sure that this woman would help Ji, and Yu replied that no one but her would help. After some time, Tao Hualing had already approached the window where the maid should have been. She remembered Yugui's words that this woman was not a backup plan in this story, but their last ray of hope. Tao Hualing leaned against the window and began to watch the maid who was wiping the dust off the table. In her thoughts, she called the girl very beautiful, but she could not stop thinking about how to convey this message. The cute maid looked a little sad, and Tao Hualing wondered if Yugui had asked her to find her. The charming maid decided to open the window to air the room in fine weather. She opened the window and looked into the distance for a few seconds, as if thinking about something. The tiny and inconspicuous fairy Tao Hualing flew up to her and tried to speak, but the woman did not hear her. The baby tried his best to speak to the maid, but she did not hear him at all and continued cleaning. Tao Hualing flew right up to the maid's face, but she didn't even look at her. The little girl began to get nervous and said to herself that it seemed the plan was doomed to fail from the start. Tao waved her arms and legs and realized that she was leaving. Except for Yugue, no one saw her. The maid continued cleaning, and at some point her hand ended up at the same level as Tao Hualing's hand. She waved her hand, but the girl passed through her hand, causing her to fall into a stupor. Tao Hualing fell to her knees and began to cry, and a blue bird the same size as her landed next to her. The maid immediately noticed a beautiful, fluffy blue bird sitting on the windowsill. The bird waved its head cutely at Tao Hualing, as if trying to convey something, which caught the girl's attention. The blue bird chirped to the girl, and she wondered with surprise whether the bird really saw her. Tao told herself that while walking through the garden, she felt as if some butterflies and squirrels were afraid of her. Hualing began to emit blue radiation, and the bird continued to sit next to her and watch closely. The pupils of the girl's bottomless blue eyes dilated, and she looked up at the sky. The bird continued to remain in one place and was absolutely motionless the whole time. Tao Hualing said in her mind that this was all so strange, but she seemed to feel something. The maid was surprised by the bird's behavior, and Tao thought that the chick was asking her what kind of bird it was. The girl realized that she seemed to be able to understand animals and communicate with them. With a sweet smile, Tao Hualing said quietly, as one would expect from her fifth kitten. She said mentally that animals understand her much better than people, and this strange thought had not left her since childhood. Tao remembered that before the major collapse, 4 cats lived in their house at the same time. One of the kittens was named Sugar. He had gray eyes and brown and white fur. The second cat was named Soul. She had blue eyes. She was plump and white with a dark brown color. The third was a gray and white cat with greenish eyes and pointy ears, whose name was Pepper. The last of the kittens was a tabby kitten named Soy Sauce, and he was smaller than all the others. Little Tao Hualing watched her beloved cats with admiration and was always by their side. She slept cuddled up to the cats and thought she could feel the emotions of all the animals. Tao Hualing also believed that to some extent she even had the opportunity to make contact with them, to such an extent that some, like them, may feel threatened by the current situation. Her memories included her clever cats, one after another jumping off the sofa, as if they had sensed something. Remembering the face of the previous girl, Tao Hualing mentally said that every person is capable of something. A little blue-eyed girl pulled her mother's white dress, distracting her from cleaning. She took her mother out into the street, where the street lights were already shining brightly, to show her something. Instead of using complex principles, Tao relied on the fact that she could do anything, so her actions depended largely on intuition. Hualing remembered how one night, before she even realized what a massive collapse was, she felt a completely different atmosphere in the house. She remembered the faces of her beloved cats, who seemed to be watching everything that was happening in the house with great understanding. Her parents said something, but she did not understand their meaning, but she felt her father's anger, her mother's regret, and panic. Tao Hualing felt that they were faced with a problem that they could not solve on their own, and gradually his father left. And the mother, constantly working at the limit of her abilities to feed the family, became increasingly tired and exhausted. Soy Sauce was the first to go. He had been ill since childhood, and she knew that the disease was not fatal, but there was no money for medicine. About a week after that, his serious older brother Pepper disappeared, but he was a good guy, knew how to catch mice, and was not afraid of dogs. Later that day, Mother added enough food to Salt and Sugar's bowls to last them 2 days. Tao remembered her mother saying she would go grocery shopping and then cook her some eggs and onions and asking her to stay home. Hualing recalled that her mother opened the door and walked out. As usual, she knew how to hide it. But she said that cats tolerate pain well, they are not afraid of it, and tears flowed down the girl's cheeks. Tao Hualing also knew that cats would not allow those dearest to them to grieve. Foreseeing their death, they simply quietly go to a place where no one will find them and die alone. She said mentally that people can behave the same way, and although she was never particularly smart, she always trusted her intuition. After all these memories, Tao Hualing burst into tears because she felt very heavy at heart. But looking back, she realizes that the mental pain subsided because something happened that pleasantly surprised her. Many small animals came running to Tao Hualing, who treated her well and were not afraid of her. The maid looked in surprise at the windowsill where so many small animals had gathered. The squirrel was friendly to the little bird with the blue breast. The caterpillar and the butterfly seemed to want to hug, but they did not have the opportunity. The blue bird that first arrived in Tao Hualing stood firmly on its paws, as if it was about to do something. She started humming something, and the girl asked if she was really calling her and asking her not to be sad. Suddenly, something strange happened. and Tao Hualing's hands became weak for a few seconds. At that very moment, the girl rose slightly in the air, as if she had entered the blue bird next to her. A slightly transparent blue tint appeared on Tao Hualing's body, indicating that she was controlling the bird. The girl did not understand what was happening, but her every movement was reflected on the blue bird. Tao Hualing's mouth opened wide in surprise, realizing that she seemed to be in the body of a small bird. The maid stood impassively on the windowsill and noticed a falling blue feather. She wanted to catch a bluebird feather, which she succeeded in doing, after which she began to examine it. The blue bird soared beautifully in the sky, which greatly interested the dispassionate girl. Tao Hualing mentally noted that controlling the bird was very difficult and tried to figure out how to maintain balance. She wondered how much Yugue was now connected to Jinji's body, as well as to the bird's body. The bird landed on the windowsill where the maid stood, and Tao decided that she should try to fulfill Yugue's request. The girl tried to pronounce the word mama, but the birds could not convey it and simply chirped. Tao Hualing was in a slight stupor and did not know what to do next, because the bird could not speak. The girl looked at the maid and thought to herself that she did not understand her at all. She could not speak with her own voice and said that she needed to enter the body of some parrot. The maid closed the window, but Tao Hualing, in the form of a small bird, managed to fly into the room. The bird began to circle around the room, and the woman said that she had just cleaned everything there. Tao told herself that while the maid's attention was focused on her, she should think of a way to convey the message to Yugai. She looked at the bookshelf and seemed to have an idea, after which she successfully developed a plan of action. There was a blue bird sitting on one of the books on the shelf, and Tao Hualing decided that she could stop at this book. She really hoped that the maid would understand her hint, and that she would convey the message to the protagonist. Tao Hualing, in the form of a blue bird, began to tap her beak on the book to attract the maid's attention. The woman was puzzled as to what the bird wanted to say with its actions. The blue bird continued to confidently and strongly tap the book with its beak so that the girl would finally open it. Her persistent actions bore fruit, and finally the woman heard the word mother. At that moment, everything in her soul collapsed, and tears flowed from her eyes like a stream because the girl was experiencing severe pain. The ground seemed to disappear from under the maid's feet, and, clutching her head, she took a few steps back. Tao Hualing was very worried and wondered if everything was okay with the woman. The maid burst into tears of grief and tried to say something, but could not. Finally, she was able to pull herself together and said that it was all true and she had to be strong. She confidently stated that she could not allow this because she was a mother. The maid threw down her mop and walked forward, saying that she would never give up her child. Tao Hualing looked after her with admiration and said that it seemed like her plan had worked. She released a blue bird and wondered if this was the magic Yugue had spoken of. After some time, Tao Hualing asked the hero if he really wanted to do everything this way. Yugue said that if this was the only way to remove the stone from Jinji's heart, then they should take this step. Jin angrily said that she wanted to talk to her father and was waiting for a response from the CCTV system. The system immediately asked the girl a question and asked her to answer who she was. Jinji confidently replied that no matter who she was, they could be sure of one thing. In a strange tone, the girl stated that she was sure that she was not Jinji. Yugue, who was in the girl's body, said that he remembered everything from their previous dialogue, as well as the third question. He said he could plead guilty, but he wanted to talk to his father first. In response, the protagonist heard only silence, but continued to listen attentively. After the bet expired, Yugue told Tao Hualing that the bets were made and all that remained was to wait. Jinji sat on the floor and bent her knees, expecting some vile and insidious actions from her side. Suddenly, the door of the closed room opened and people in yellow protective suits entered. They sprayed a strange pink substance into the room, and Jinji began to lose consciousness. A few minutes later, they put a straitjacket on her and tied her up with belts. She was given an injection in the neck, and one of the men said that it would be better to increase the dose and asked that measures be taken to prevent her from moving. People in yellow protective suits began to leave the room, but one of them stopped. The man looked at Jinji with slight pity and looked at her for a few seconds. The unconscious girl was chained to a table in a sitting position and remained unconscious for some time. After some time, Jinji woke up, and the blonde who deprived her of a happy life said that she finally woke up. For the first few seconds, the girl silently looked into the man's eyes, trying to come to her senses. The man greeted Jinji and said that he regretted that their meeting was taking place under such circumstances. The girl looked around with some excitement and was shocked by what was happening around her. The father calmly admitted that it was indeed extremely rude to treat his daughter like that. He added that he had been waiting for her to appear again since that very evening 4 years ago when they had the opportunity to talk at the gate. Yu-Gue, in the girl's body, overheard the conversation and thought to himself that it was now clear what those 3 questions were about. Father Jinji, wearing a white medical coat, began to tell the young man that everything could have turned out differently if he had come earlier. He said that in that case his poor daughter would not have to suffer for so long. Yu-Gue replied that even without his intervention, his daughter was being treated cruelly, so this was just an excuse to turn the situation around. The father agreed, but said that his appearance had opened up new horizons for his research that he had not even thought of before. Standing up from his chair, he said that due to his own prejudices, he had not been able to guess about Yu-Gue's presence for a long time. The father added that, having analyzed all the actions and words of this guy from the very moment he first found himself in the basement, he finally understood something. He realized that Yu-Gue was never the third person that Jinji had created to protect herself from bad memories. The man cast an independent, unworldly glance at the protagonist. Jinji's father also added that this was his first glimpse of a conscious object. He said that the perception of others, besides himself, is already his second glance. And the existence of objects and phenomena, considered from an objective point of view, represents the third point of view. The man said that regardless of these 3 points of view, which is theoretically impossible, with a slight tremor in his voice, he said that, after all, there was a 4th point of view. Yu-Gue looked at the man with particular surprise and wariness, although he could not see him. In his thoughts, he said that even among these people, there were those who, like him, were ready to wait for his appearance again after the second meeting. The father called this guy clairvoyant and said that he probably had a rule that he should follow. Yu-Gue immediately became lost in his thoughts and began to recall many moments from his life. If he used the deep dive function frequently, his actions would allow some people to become aware of his presence. He remembered a cute girl with pink hair and a guy with gray hair, who had one eye that was red and the other yellow. Yu-Gue silently reflected for a while on how his actions were often wasteful. Jinji's father said that he did not know what his little daughter had done to deserve his favor, but since his intentions were not evil, he offered to help each other by healing his daughter. The words of the girl's father shocked the young man, and he reacted to them very violently. With Jinji's help, he shouted and asked if he really meant the super healing ability. Tao Hualing was frightened and thought to herself that this was the first time she had seen Yu-Gue react so violently. She wondered if that was why he didn't want to save himself alone. Jinji's father suddenly began to laugh loudly, and his laughter seemed crazy. Yu-Gue asked him what he was laughing at and whether he was really doing all this to help his daughter awaken her abilities. But the girl's father, covering his mouth with his hand, replied that he was laughing at the fact that, despite having such a wide field of vision, Yu-Gue saw only one thing. With a contemptuous grin, he asked if this was just stupidity on the part of the protagonist or something else. He added that he had actually known the truth for a long time, but deep down he did not want to accept it. The demon approached the sad Yu-Gue from behind and managed to hug him, which frightened Tao Hualing. When she shouted at the protagonist to pay attention, it was already too late because the demon's hands were on the guy's face. The blonde closed the protagonist's eyes and said that he didn't have to listen if he didn't want to. Yu-Gue stood motionless, his eyes still covered by the demon's paws. While the main character was unable to move, Jean's body remained motionless, chained to the chair. The demoness grinned wickedly, approached Jinji, and said that he could provide it to her. The demon with red eyes approached the girl and was about to do something to her. Tao Hualing was very wary, screamed, and asked what the demon did to Yu-Gue. When she wanted to fly up to the demoness to stop her, the insidious demoness struck her. Jinji's father's gaze at that moment was serious and at the same time cold-blooded in relation to what was happening. Yu-Gue, being in the girl's body, screamed in pain at the top of his voice, and the girl herself began to sweat profusely. Jinji's cunning father wondered if his reaction of rejection had provoked him. He waved his hand to his subordinates and said that in this case he would have to wait a little longer. Yu-Gue walked up to Jinji and touched her shoulder, which had an unknown liquid on it. The girl asked him to leave in a tired voice, but the main character silently took her hand. He looked into her eyes, holding her hand, and said that she needed her body a little longer. The cunning demoness tried to attack him, but Yu-Gue deftly dodged her blow. He closed his eyes and concentrated deeply to fully enjoy the effect of deep immersion. Jinji's eyes opened wide, sweat ran down her face, and she herself breathed heavily for the first few minutes. Yu-Gue couldn't understand how she had taken on this form, and if it weren't for Tao Hualing's help, she would have been able to regain control of her body. Jinji's father adjusted his glasses and asked the protagonist in a calm tone if he had returned yet. Yugue, in the girl's body, looked the man sternly in the eyes and asked him to speak faster, since he had little time. The cunning blond man in the medical gown snapped his finger and smiled slyly, as if he was planning something. He stood up from the burgundy chair and said in a calm tone that he was a doctor and a father. He also added that whether Yugue believed it or not, he had never killed a single person in his entire life. The protagonist in Jinji's body asked why he should believe what he said. The girl's father used a laser pointer because he was going to explain the situation to the boy. An electronic board appeared in front of Yugue, and the man announced that it displayed scientific research data. He began to say that since ancient times, the murderers in the Goldstein family, without exception, were always only women. Jinji's father said with some regret that the curse had been passed down through generations in this generation. He told the protagonist that the body he was in was actually named Wu Ji Goldstein. Meanwhile, Lawyer Ming looked at the time on her phone, and it was 11:45 noon. Her white cloak fluttered lightly in the wind, and he continued to wait for the main character, who was late for the meeting. The girl looked around, hoping to finally see Yugue, but he was nowhere to be seen. She said he kept her waiting for over 2 hours, and if it had been another man, she would not have waited longer. Ming was surprised, but another man had indeed come, and in her thoughts, she called Yugue not so hopeless. She smiled and asked Manager Jiang what brought him here, to which he replied that it was Yugue's order. He said that a few days ago you instructed him to replace him if he did not contact him. Jiang handed over the flash drive and said that it contained the data she needed and assured that there would be enough of it. But before giving her the flash drive, he said that she must first do one last favor for Yugue. Jiang said that he needed her to use all her strength and help him smuggle Yu's younger sister. His words interested Ming's lawyer, and she quietly asked what the reason for all this was. Manager Jiang replied that the reason was that Yugue suspected something related to his sister Yu Ming. Thoughts about his beloved sister always tormented the main character, because he missed her very much. Manager Jiang added that the young man suspected that she had become the target of a demon that steals the dead. He explained that this so-called curse was never some kind of superpower, it was something more ancient. Later, after the advent of alchemy, people from generation to generation began to search for the key to removing the curses of the Goldstein family. But no one knows what questions prompted their desire for knowledge and why only women suffer. By the time the research results reached Father Jean, countless casualties and erroneous conclusions had already accumulated. He said that under his leadership, they would put an end to the secrecy, which would allow him to take all the credit and become the greatest. Yugue asked what direction he was conducting his research in, to which the man replied that it was genetic modification. He said with a proud smile that he had never hidden this in his life, and asked what the main character thought about it. Yugue remained calm and silent, carefully considering his words. Jinji's father continued to talk about primeval myths and religious rituals. He said that theoretically, this mutation represents a problem on a material level and should be reflected in the structure of genes. The man said that he dared to guess that Yugue had no familial feelings for Jinji from the very beginning. The protagonist said that he simply used her, and she still remains just a product of an experiment. The girl's father clapped his hands and asked if he was satisfied with the story and if they could discuss cooperation. Yugue asked the man emotionlessly what kind of cooperation he wanted to talk about. The protagonist confidently declared that if he could save Jinji, he would agree to any price. The girl's father lowered his glasses and said that this was wonderful, and he would tell him about his plan. He said that he understood that Yu was eager to take possession of his daughter's ability, which takes away a person's life force. Father said that to some extent, with the help of this curse, it is indeed possible to achieve an effect similar to healing. He asked Yugue if he really needed this ability to save someone very dear to him. The protagonist admitted in his thoughts that he was right, because he initially came with the goal of saving Xiao Ming, but later wanted to help Jinji. Overall, there is no difference in the behavior of her father and the young man, and Yugue is even more hypocritical, which only makes the situation worse. Tao Walling did not understand what was happening to the main character and looked around in surprise. Jinji's father told him that he should know that the damned often live like ordinary people. One such example was the life of a little and sweet girl, Jinji, who one day looked out the window. She saw her teacher Ardelic, who was talking with his favorite senior servant. The father added that the curse would only take effect if certain conditions were met. He was going to give an example to the main character, recalling the behavior of his daughter in childhood. The man said that, for example, a sudden change in mood, and voila, the hidden second personality has already taken control of the body. He also said that the hidden personality retains all the memories of the murders it committed. The man added that it is usually very difficult for the owner of the body to resist the hidden personality. But despite all this, Jinji's father said that the appearance of the main character changed the situation for the better. Yu-Gue said that he was going to go outside, so he wanted to use his consciousness to suppress the cruel personality that was thirsty for blood. The hero said that even without talking about whether he would succeed, there was still one problem. His consciousness could not be in her body all the time. Jinji's father asked the young man why he couldn't do it, as if he was planning something. Tao Hualing, like Yu-Gue, became wary and wondered what this man meant. With a threatening look, the girl's father asked the boy if he had just said that he would agree to any price. He also asked why he didn't remain in this mortal body and exist as a part of Jinji's consciousness. Father said that he would continue to use suggestion, and over time their consciousnesses would merge and form one new one. He said that Yu-Gue would be able to use Jinji's body, using her abilities to save whoever he wanted. Tao Hualing anxiously asked the protagonist what would happen to him in reality if he did what the man said. Yu-Gue bowed his head and asked what she thought would happen to the diver if he couldn't surface. Tao Hualing became worried when she realized that he would drown and said that she could not agree to this. Yu-Gue knew that he would not agree, because if the truth about the abilities was like this, then they would not be able to heal Xiaomeng, so there was no point. The hero replied to the man that all this sounded extremely disadvantageous, and that he would receive too little for his help. The young man said that although he had spoken of cooperation, he had not actually intended to give him the right to choose. Jinji's father stated that he had been injecting her with drugs that dulled her consciousness for several years. The main character, in the body of a girl in shackles, sat on a chair, silently watching the actions of the enemy. He smiled slyly and said that he didn't think the main character would be able to resist in any way. One of the villain's subordinates prepared a syringe with green injection liquid to inject Jinji. But Yu-Gue was not at all afraid. She smiled and said that they would look because there was something that her father did not know. The protagonist in Jinji's body jumped up and quickly headed towards the enemy. The girl's father became alarmed and ordered his subordinates to immediately seize the girl before she could harm anyone. Subordinates in yellow protective suits immediately took up arms, intending to neutralize the target. Each of the armed guards loaded his rifle and pistol, aiming at the target. All guns were fired at the target, but the nimble Jinji hid behind a chair, making it difficult to aim. With a sharp movement, she grabbed one of the guards, twisted his arm, and knocked out the pistol. Jinji looked at her father with bottomless eyes, and Yu-Gue was about to say something to him. He confidently stated that this was their first contribution to further cooperation. 10:45, 3 hours ago, the charming maid was riding in the elevator, doing her job, as usual. Having climbed up to the second floor, she continued to push the cart with food in front of her. She quietly and slowly pushed the cart with food along the dimly lit corridor of the building. A small blue bird sat on the maid's shoulder, and in her body was Tao Hualing, who was rejoicing at the success of the plan. The girl did not know what the maid would do next, but she hoped that it would help Yu-Gue. The CCTV camera in the hallway was pointed directly at the maid, but that didn't stop her. The maid continued to push the cart forward along the corridor, where a left turn awaited her. The blue bird, hiding behind the girl's hair, suddenly flew up from her shoulder. The maid also hid some abilities, and at that very moment, they disappeared from the camera's view. The charming girl called the bird strange, and with a sharp movement, rushed forward. She found herself in the right room, namely the warehouse of protective suits, and took off her dress. Someone started knocking on the warehouse door, which attracted the attention of the maid and Tao Hualing, who was in the body of a bird. The girl decided to take matters into her own hands and distract the newcomers while the maid stole the suit. Two guards did not understand what was happening and where the bird came from in the room. Tao Hualing's actions gave the maid time, and she was grateful to the bird for its help. Yu-Gue in Jinji's body continued to deal with the enemies flawlessly, neutralizing them one after another. The girl's father mentally said that her body and mind were not fettered, but returned to their normal state. The military equipment seemed very familiar to the man, which at that moment could not help but make him wary. Jinji's father's subordinates, wearing yellow protective suits, lay down on the ground one after another. The father became nervous and wondered if it was really her and whether he had explained to her the seriousness of the situation. At some point, the man simply turned around and confidently began to walk away without saying anything. Jinji's eyes widened and turned red, and the killing intent became even stronger. The blonde in the black robe used one of her abilities to pull Jinji's father. Yu-Gue, in the girl's body, struggled with the unbearable desire to kill, while simultaneously pulling the girl towards herself. The protagonist was wondering if they should first come up with a way to escape from here. Jinji turned upside down, clenched her teeth tightly, and closed one eye. Yugue mentally said that if they continued to fight for control of the body, they would only be trapping themselves. Jinji continued to dodge the shots of her opponents, who did not move from their target. The blonde asked why he came, and in that case, perhaps he would simply give her control over the body. She said that Jinji did not have what he was looking for and asked why he was here. This question bothered the main character himself, and at that moment, he wondered why he was still here. Yugue bowed his head thoughtfully and told himself that he only came to heal his sister Xiaoming. Now that his mental state has been restored, he and Tao Hualing can come out of deep diving at any time. But he was still worried about what would happen to Jinji if he left now. Yugue realized that she would no longer have the opportunity to stray from the path of the killer. In his eyes, there was Jinji walking on the bloody path, and her ages were different. In the fight with him, the girl's second personality only gets stronger, and she drowns in blood. Yugue assumed that it was his actions that led to this outcome of events, and he still hoped for her salvation. Suddenly, several loud shots from a pistol rang out, hitting the ears hard. Jinji screamed in pain because she was shot and could no longer resist. Two people in protective suits grabbed her arms and asked a colleague to quickly administer the medicine. The bloody version of Jinji whispered in Yugu's ear that this was his last chance, so he needed to make a decision. She asked him to think about who he wanted to save and asked if he really wanted to stay here forever. One of the armed men in a yellow suit placed his hand on Jinji's shoulder. Yugue closed his eyes and raised his head, as if about to take a desperate step. Two men continued to hold the exhausted Jinji, while the third gave orders to the others. Tao Hualing was worried and surprised by the protagonist's actions, and Jin was still unconscious. Yugue simply turned around and quietly asked how to leave without saying anything else. But he still desperately told her that there was nothing more they could do here, and all their actions were in vain. The bloodied version of Jinji approached the still young girl and began to examine every inch of her body. She approached her younger counterpart and took advantage of the deep-sea dive. The deep dive was successful. Jinji's eyes seemed to light up, and she thanked the Lord for this. Suddenly, when one of the men was about to give an injection, the girl began to resist. She broke free from the other guard's grasp and jerked forward to avoid being detained. Bloody Jinji's eyes flashed red as she sternly declared that they had sacrificed themselves. There was human blood everywhere, and the girl said it was time to celebrate the birth of a healthy child. The last of the guards in yellow protective suits fell to the floor, bleeding. Meanwhile, the hospital was also in complete chaos as they were organizing the transportation of Xiaoming's body. The wheels of the medical gurney were spinning nonstop across the floor of the medical facility. The people's steps were loud because they had to walk quickly as time was short. Manager Zhang walked ahead and surveyed the situation, while Lawyer Meng and the armed guards walked behind. The manager said that they needed to go there immediately, and Xiaoming was lying unconscious on the platform. Suddenly, all those involved in transporting the patient fell into a stupor and looked ahead warily. A foot in a black boot appeared from around the corner of the corridor, which stopped Manager Jiang. It turned out that Nurse Jinji was standing around the corner and asked if she could pick up a seriously ill patient. With a smile, she asked if it was possible to do this without the consent of the head nurse. Manager Jiang was very nervous and sweat ran down his face as the situation became tense. Meng's lawyer was just as tense because she didn't know what to expect next. Nurse Jinji smiled sweetly at them, but that didn't make the situation any less tense. Behind the sweet nanny's back, her bloody likeness was visible, eager to kill. 11:15, the bloodied girl repeated the sound of the clock and asked if he could hear her now. She stated threateningly that there was no point in hiding, since she knew which door he was behind. She had a bloody sharp knife in her hands, and, repeating the sound of the clock again, she said that it was just a game. Jinji's face was covered in someone's blood, and with a terrifying smile, she said that there was no need to run away because she could smell the blood. She stood still, and drops of someone's blood flowed from the blade and hands and fell on the floor. Jinji looked down the corridor, realizing that very soon she would have to solve her main task. The girl smiled ominously and said that her father's time had finally come. CCTV footage shows a maid in a yellow suit accompanying Jinji. The girl's father hid in his office and watched every fragment of the video recording. At the end of the video, only 2 guards in yellow suits remained, lying unconscious. He said that people who are missing one of their chromosomes clearly lack the ability to think logically and make sound decisions. The system asked him if he really wanted to start the full isolation system. But quite unexpectedly, a knife was put to Jinji's father's throat, which greatly alarmed him. He turned around cautiously and saw the maid holding a knife at his throat, which also alerted him. The girl asked him to let Jinji go because she was not guilty of anything. 11:30. The man smiled slyly and said that it was possible, but at that moment the maid's face showed pain. He sternly asked her if she had ever thought about those whom Jinji would kill. The girl continued to hold the knife to his throat, and the man said that in the future it could be the same innocent people. He grabbed a sharp combat knife lying on the table and stuck it straight into his hand. Blood flowed across the table, and Jinji's father snapped his fingers and used the blue beard technique. He looked at the black-haired girl and said that she was still as stupid as before. The man mockingly said that as soon as she removed the knife from his neck, she immediately turned into a puppet. But it was at this moment that the maid's behavior surprised the man and plunged him into a stupor. She stuttered a little from excitement, but began to say that they were innocent, but there was something connected with Jinji. The girl said that Jean was her daughter and was silent for a few minutes. At that very moment, Jinji herself stood at the door of the room, holding a bloody knife in her hands. She let go of the bloody knife, which at the same moment fell freely to the floor and stained it with blood. The black-haired maid noticed the girl standing in the doorway. Jinji's father looked at her in a daze, but remained silent. Blood flowed down the girl's hands, dripping onto the floor, and she herself asked what it meant. Jinji asked what daughter meant, and the maid looked down at the floor, while the father was simply serious. At that very moment, the girl's mother hit her father with a sharp movement, taking him by surprise. Jinji couldn't believe that the maid was really his mother, and his mother simply said that everything would be fine now. But the girl stood there for several minutes in a daze, not knowing how to react to all this. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, which she immediately wiped away and continued to think silently. Jinji nervously stamped her foot, remaining silent. Suddenly the girl's father fired a loud shot from the pistol he was holding with bloody gloves. At that moment, Jinji's eyes were full of shock, and he looked into the eyes of the maid, who turned out to be his mother. The girl's father took aim accurately, so he did not miss, and the bullet hit the maid right in the back. Holding the gun in his hands, he smiled and said that she had won, truly acknowledging her victory. He said that she had managed to free herself from his power over her body, but she herself had so naively turned away from him. The man asked if she didn't know that he wouldn't kill a subject important for research, and Jinji panicked. My father once believed that there were no problems in the world that could not be solved by the scientific method, but now he realizes that he was wrong. He said that this problem was incurable human stupidity, and the maid died in Jinji's arms. The girl panicked and started crying. She didn't know what to do because her mother was bleeding heavily. Finally, she asked Jinji with great difficulty to forgive her, because she remembered too late. At that very moment, she closed her eyes and threw her head back, which indicated her death. Jinji was shocked, but said that she would not let her die so easily. Blood flowed down the girl's cheek, and she herself began to move her lips towards her mother's lips. In her thoughts, she said that she would allow herself to live forever in her body, and first of all those who deserve death should die. Jinji's father still held the gun in his hands and was very surprised by what was happening. The girl continued to hold her mother in her arms and said that they would return together to this garden of sins. The father was not going to give her a chance to survive and decided to shoot his own daughter. The fact that he pointed the gun did not frighten Jinji at all, and she calmly looked into his eyes. Dropping the gun from his hands, he said that he didn't know how the fourth sight did it, but she and her mother were no longer under its control. He said that he had read a few fairy tales, otherwise how would he have come up with such a code word? The man added that in the finale, Bluebeard's young wife went against her own husband. And with Rapunzel, everything was predetermined long ago, according to the plot of the fairy tale he spoke of. In the end, Jinji's father said that Rapunzel would escape from the tower, as predicted in the Bluebeard tale. A.D. A violent storm began, thunder rumbled loudly, and lightning struck several times a minute. Tao Hualing screamed from the water in fear and asked Yu Guei what was going on. The protagonist tried to keep his cool and said that everything was about to collapse. He also said that next time deep-sea diving will be closed to Jinji. Tao Hualing and Yu Guei were covered by a wave, but after some time, they still managed to float to the surface. The main character adjusted his hair and only in a serious voice told the girl that it was time for them to go. Meanwhile, there were many police cars near the Xiaqing District Hospital, and a helicopter was patrolling above the hospital itself. The journalist reported that she was in a hospital in the Xiaqing District, where police had already begun an investigation. Manager Jiang was carried on a stretcher and, according to the reporter, he appeared to have suffered serious injuries. A journalist asked the manager if it was true that the bandits who carried out the attack were valuable hospital employees. At the end, she asked one last question. Were the women taken hostage employees of his hospital? Meanwhile, Lawyer Meng was completely bound, with a bandage on her face, and was just beginning to come to her senses. The rain was falling on the girl, and she really panicked when she realized that she was tied up. She began to struggle with all her might and turned her gaze to the left, where someone's silhouette could be seen. Behind the white curtain, a woman could be seen doing something with the same girl's hair. The wind from the window fluttered the light, snow-white curtains, and a bright beam of light illuminated the room. Ji was wearing a wine-colored dress, and Xiao Meng was sitting on a chair doing her hair. The girl with orange eyes looked tiredly and desperately at the floor, silently waiting for her hair to be done. Ji touched her shoulders and asked her to wait a second, to which the girl only remained silent. She herself went to the bathroom, where Lawyer Meng was lying, raging and disturbing her. Ji pulled back the curtain and saw a tied-up girl with her legs raised and holding a shoe in her hands. The charming blonde calmly asked if she could stop shaking the air and be more quiet. Lawyer Meng was sweating with excitement and hoped that Ji would release her from the shackles. The charming blonde seemed to look with pity at the girl who so wanted to be free. She took off the bandage and Meng asked, as she had just taken a bath and changed her clothes, as if she was next. But Ji calmly replied to her that Xiao was special and did not need a bath because she was already clean. She pushed Meng's lawyer to the floor and said that women like her didn't care how bright and beautiful they dressed. She said that their souls would remain just as dirty and the lawyer would still be tied up. The tied-up girl silently looked around the room, in particular at Xiao Meng, who looked down at the floor. The girl asked Ji if all these sleeping beauties were really her collection. Beautiful girls looked flawless in the Jin collection. One of them was a charming blonde. The nurse herself asked whether Meng's lawyer agreed that all these girls were pretty. The lawyer said that she actually didn't have such a bad character and advised her to think it over again. Her words only angered Ji, and she immediately ran up to the frightened tied-up girl. She grabbed the lawyer by the face and threateningly stated that she did not understand at all how they were different from her. Ji scratched the girl's thigh and called her greedy, avaricious, self-righteous, and following the rules of the man's world. She said that this girl was no different from the waitresses, and her life was not even suitable for Xiao Meng as a source of nutrition. Meng's lawyer kept her cool and said she seemed to have figured something out. Looking into Ji's eyes, she said that it turned out that the killer demon was her, and the corpse-snatching demon was also her. It turned out that in order to prevent the bodies of girls suffering from soul loss syndrome from returning to their families, she took them and hid them at home. The lawyer also realized that in order to survive, Jin hunted for dirty and low girls. She asked if this was because life force could be transmitted from a person of the same sex, but Ji replied that they simply disgusted her. Running a sharp claw along the wall, she was about to explain to the lawyer what she meant. Ji said that some people are happy but do not love themselves. In that case, why not let her love them? She began to think about who would be suitable for Main's power, but the girl said that she had more problems with her head than he thought. Ji asked with interest who she was talking about, and asked if it was Jiang Qi who told her all this. Meng's lawyer chuckled and said she might not like what she had to say. She asked if Ji had exalted herself, and said that her love was actually a one-sided projection of feelings. Meng asked why she decided to save all the patients with soul loss syndrome. She also said that at best it is equivalent to the attitude of a child towards his toys, but these feelings are far from love. The same Xiao Meng, at the last moment before going to bed, thought about someone who loved her, for example, a brother who was ready to do anything for her. The tied-up lawyer Meng provocatively stated that Ji is nobody to her, and that they don't even know each other. The charming blonde turned around and said that she simply didn't understand anything about it. Meng asked what had brought her to this state. Had her parents really not taught her to express emotions? These words completely angered Ji, and she screamed at the top of her voice that she didn't understand anything. In anger, she grabbed Meng, who had provoked her, by the throat and lifted her from the floor. 12:30 p.m. The girl sensed poisonous gas in the room, but kept her cool. She looked into Ji's bloodied eyes and told herself that she could hold out for another minute since she had antibodies. But an ordinary person without antibodies would not have lasted even 30 seconds, so her chances of survival were somewhat higher. Ji's eyes were filled with rage and the desire to kill more and more with each passing second. Meng looked at Xiao Meng, who was sitting silently, and realized that without antibodies, she would only live for 30 seconds. In an instant, the bloody Ji stopped strangling the girl and simply rushed away. She covered her mouth to prevent the poison gas from taking effect, and Meng began to fall to the floor. Ji grabbed Xiao Meng with a sharp movement, after which they immediately jumped out of the window. She hugged the girl tightly and with a confident jump broke the window glass. Attorney Meng assessed the situation and realized that it was not poisonous gas, but just smoke. She leaned helplessly against the wall and began to look out the window, thinking about what had happened. Meng said that instead of reporting information to her superiors, she chose to cooperate with police and that it saved her life. She looked out the window and apologized to Ji because she only said all this to anger her, and then took her words back. At least when it comes to Xiao Meng, she can't deny her sincere feelings and strong intentions. Attorney Meng thought about the outcome of the situation for a while and realized something. 12:45 a.m. helicopter flew over the building, and she said that everything happened exactly as Yu expected. It was late at night on the street, and there was a police car with flashing lights parked near one of the buildings. Tao Hualing lay on her bed in a white nightgown, finally trying to sleep. But obsessive thoughts and strong anxiety about the main character prevented her from sleeping. She remembered how Yu left home, telling her that only she, besides him, knew who was behind all this. Tao Hualing told herself that this way the feeling of anxiety only intensified, and her intuition always turned out to be correct. Insomnia overcame the girl, and she was just sitting on the bed, hugging the pillow, when suddenly the phone rang. The girl immediately grabbed the phone and picked it up, and it turned out that Wang Nanchao was calling her. Tao Hualing talked to her uncle and said that she herself could not help if the police did not help her. The girl was very worried, and her anxious thoughts only intensified when she looked out the window with annoyance. Meanwhile, Yu shook hands with Lawyer Meng in the helicopter and asked where Xiao Meng was. The girl said with a smile that she was risking herself for him, and that he could take care of her first. She said that Ji took her with him, but the police even sent an airship to help in the search, so they won't get far. Yu asked if she could help him negotiate with the police so that they would trust him to negotiate with a criminal. Meng's lawyer stated that, based on their short conversation with her, she does not believe that a man can replace Xiao Meng for her. But she still said that she could ask, but first she had to wait until the police cornered Ji. Wang Nanchao sat on the roof with a sniper rifle and thought in his mind that she was both a demon slayer and a kidnapper. He also mentally noted that, when working in the police, one should not get used to high-profile cases, but such madness had never happened. At some point, he told himself that he had enough of thinking and needed to focus on the goal. Wang Nanchao understood that the hostage's safety was at risk and hoped that he had not yet lost control and influence over him. It was already dark outside, and the policeman patiently waited for his target. At some point, he saw Ji quickly run forward, holding the sleeping Xiao Meng in her arms. In her thoughts, she told herself that she needed to get rid of everyone who wanted to stop her as soon as possible. But completely unexpectedly for her, she found herself surrounded by police officers who were already loading their weapons. The second group of police officers loaded their machine guns and prepared to shoot to kill. Ji was surrounded by police officers and ordered to stay put, release the hostage, and raise her hands. The girl immediately realized that there were 15 of them, and after the first shot, she decided to kill the 3 policemen on the stairs. The protagonist, Yu wanted to talk to her, climbed the steps to Ji. The blonde hugged Xiao Meng even tighter and, remaining calm, looked at the guy. Yu asked if it was true that the reason for this situation was only her desire to protect his sister. Ji asked if he wanted to risk his sister's life and if he thought she could harm her. Yu lowered his head and said that he knew, so he was more than sure, and Xiao Meng was not her friend from the past. After these words, Ji fell into a stupor, and her pupils widened greatly in surprise. She hugged Xiao Meng even tighter and angrily asked what he could possibly know about this. Yu calmly told her that his sister was as innocent as she was when she fell victim to a curse. Ji became furious, her eyes filled with red. She screamed and asked the protagonist not to come closer. In anger, she waved her hand and scratched his face, but in response, Yu looked at her with upset look. He told her that if she wanted to leave, she could switch places with Xiao Meng and hurt him as much as she wanted. Yu said that it was because of him that she chose this tragic path, and for Ji, at that moment, everything began to become clear. She was deeply immersed in these thoughts and wondered if it was really him. Her mind was full of all sorts of memories in which she felt someone's presence. Wang Nanchao, armed with a sniper rifle, noticed that the target was distracted and immediately took aim. He knew he had to do it now, otherwise there might not be another chance. The policeman took aim straight at Ji's forehead, finally about to pull the trigger. As he was about to pull the trigger, he heard a strange sound that distracted him. Wang Nanchao received a phone call from home that distracted him from work. He was surprised because he had specifically switched his mobile phone to silent mode for this time, and the call could only come from home. He also understood that it was Tao Hualing who was calling, and he should have been asleep long ago. A policeman, heavily distracted by a telephone call, pulled the trigger of a sniper rifle. But, as it turned out later, at that moment the object of observation was the chest of the unconscious Xiao Meng. Manager Jiang Qi was still wearing a breathing mask and was unconscious. Blue-eyed lawyer Meng stood silently in place, without making a sound. Wang Nanchao's eyes widened in shock as he realized he had fired an unwanted shot. Tao Hualing was very worried and kept trying to call her uncle. Yu Gui looked at Jin Ji, who stood silently in place after the shot. Her eyes were still very red, but after the shot her gaze became empty. Wang Nanchao mentally repeated to himself that the situation remained the same, and he was still a helpless observer. Due to the time lag, he saw everything clearly, but he couldn't understand why Jin Ji covered the hostage with her body. After the shot, she put Xiao Meng on the ground and, without letting go, made her bleed silently. The police immediately shouted that the target had been defeated, and it was therefore possible to free the hostage. But Yu Gui, who had drops of blood on his face, did not allow them to do this, shouted and demanded that they stop. With deep regret in his eyes, he asked Jin Ji why she did this. The bloodied girl knelt down and tried to find an answer to Yu Gui's question. Every time she remembers a dark period of the past, it seems to her that her memories are going in different directions. But Jin Ji still said that in one of them she saw this face, and its owner slept with her and died in her arms. And whenever these memories overtake her in a dream, they're always accompanied by strange emotions, but she does not like this dream. Thus, without realizing it, the 11th witch acted extremely selfishly. Jin Ji, bleeding profusely, began to move her lips towards the sleeping Xiao Mengs. The 11th witch selfishly imprisoned her lover in a dream world, and the end of the house's curse turned into tragedy. Therefore, she decided to replace the princess with herself, to return her to the future, entrusting it to the not yet handsome prince. And with a calm smile, the 11th witch Jin Ji fell into eternal sleep, and Yu Gui hugged his beloved sister Xiao Meng.